Good evening. Let's call to order the special meeting of the Champaign County Board. It's Wednesday, May 9th, 2018. The time is 7:03. Roll call, please.
Esri,
Here.
Furtado. Goss,
Here.
Harper,
Here.
Hartke, King, Marsh, McGuire, Mitchell, Patterson,
Here.
Petrie,
Present.
Rector, Rosales,
Here.
Storr, Summers, Tinsley, Anderson, Clemens, Clifford, Coert, Cruz, Weibel.
Present. We have a quorum. Would the clerk please read notice of the meeting?
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on May 9th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in the Lyle Shields Meeting Room, Brookins Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street in Urbana, Illinois, in said county for the purpose of a presentation to be given by Altitude Health Services, Inc., an Extended Care Clinic, LLC, and an overview of the impact of the nursing home sale on outstanding nursing home bonds and any other business pending before the board, which said meeting shall continue in session from day to day until the completion of said business.
Thank you. Seek approval of the agenda and the addenda.
So
Moved by Mr. Mitchell, second by Mr. Rosales. And discussion, see none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Next up, we have the presentation by Altitude Health Services and Extended Care Clinical. I know that two of the presenters are Ron Nunciato and Avi Rothbaum. You have the microphone. I would point out that you need to turn it on. There's a little red button right in front there in the center. And you don't have to, you have to be somewhat close to it, don't have to be super close to it, but if you do, somebody else wants to speak to it, you should hand the microphone off to them if you please. Go ahead. And also, we're going to have this presentation without questions. We'll have questions afterwards. Is that okay with you?
I don't have much in the way of prepared and formal remarks,
Okay.
so I thought this would be much better to have a conversation. So, Mr. County Board Chair and members of the County Board, thank you for having us. To my left is Ron Nunziato, the COO of Extended Care Clinical. To my right is Amy Fish, who is the administrator of Lancaster Rehabilitation Center in Lincoln, Nebraska, a facility that also underwent a county transition to a private entity. I am Avi Rothner. I'm the president and CEO of Altitude Health Services. So I think this is probably for your benefit. I would like to just say, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not here to necessarily sway anybody. As far as I'm concerned, most of the people, what I've found in these situations is people who are for the sale are for the sale. People who are against the sale are against the sale. There are some people in the middle, and I'm not necessarily going to change people's opinion because I'm going to tell you that I'm going to have wonderful care, or that we're going to involve the community, or I'm not, or I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that. So this idea that I'm here to change people's minds or even to promote myself is I would like to just kind of put that off the table. Really, we're here because we were told there's a county nursing home for sale. Just so that the board knows, I calculated from my knowledge of our industry that I am probably the second most experienced county buyer in the country. There's a man in New York who's bought more county buildings than I have, but I believe I'm number two. You can probably verify that with Marcus and Millchap, your broker. And we're just excited about the opportunity, and the only reason we're here is because we understood there was a facility that might be for sale. Had there not been, we might not have come, but at the same time, that's the luck and the circumstance and the synchronicity of situations that actually brought us into Nebraska. So I think we've answered a lot of the questions in the RFP. We've answered all the questions in the RFP. We've had a number of people from the evaluation committee who've gone to see 3 facilities that Extended Care operates. I think the takeaway from the evaluation committee had its positives, and I'm sure there were some people or some parts that were less positive. But really, we're looking forward to the opportunity. As I've pointed out to some people, we still have work on our side to do. We don't understand everything that goes on in the building. I haven't had a chance to meet with the administrator, understand staffing, understand purchasing, understand any of the operations. So this idea that I know, or that Ron knows, or that Amy would know what we're going to do on day one is kind of silly. We know what we do generally, but we always tailor those to the circumstances. Just a little bit of background. I've been in the nursing home business for almost 13 years. I'm probably one of the largest, our family together with some of the other arms that we own or control. We're probably the largest owner of skilled nursing facilities in the state. And we have teams of dedicated clinicians, accounting, legal, accounts payable, accounts receivable, compliance, services that run the gamut that support the nursing facility. And so we think we're well versed in the industry. I've given lectures in many places, nationally and internationally, including Marcus and Millichap. I just spoke last week in Israel just about the nursing home industry, and so I think our qualifications are excellent. Again, we were the only people to participate in the RFP, and we did submit a full and satisfactory bid. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Amy really is here, and I asked her to come because I thought it was important, and Amy can certainly speak for herself. She's been given zero instructions on what to expect. I think it's instructive that you can understand that there's life after nursing home being owned by a county. And Amy can certainly speak to that. She was not the administrator that took over after we bought from the county, but is the immediate successor to that administrator. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments that anyone might have.
Why don't we go ahead and have her give her story?
Sure.
As Mr. Rothner mentioned, my name is Amy Fish. I have been a healthcare administrator for 30 years. I started with Lancaster Rehabilitation Center in 2014, 4 years after the sale, although I was an administrator throughout the time of the sale at a competing skilled nursing facility, probably about 2 or 3 miles away. So I watched the sale unfold. Because at the time, Lancaster Manor, of course, was county-owned, 293-bed facility, so similar in size. We're also a university town, or a Big Ten school as well. So go Big Red. So I was able to watch it, and I have enough experience as a nursing home administrator that it was, it wasn't easy. And Avi can speak to that more than I, because I was just watching it from across the street. But upon joining the organization, the transition actually after the sale, from a staff's perspective, from an operations perspective, went smoothly. There's efficiencies in running a skilled nursing facility when you have that operational overhead support. And so there's savings that automatically happen that then catapult you into a profitable situation, not because I'm a brilliant administrator necessarily, but because you have a lot of smart people around the table helping make good decisions. There are also some other built-in benefits, obviously, that staff, the whole anxiety is not knowing, the whole not know what's going to happen, whether it's a for-profit nursing home buying another for-profit nursing home, however it may be, governmental to not-for-profit, it doesn't really matter. There's going to be angst amongst the staff wondering innately what's in it for me. And what they were able to find was that Altitude Health Services was very fair to them. There was obviously an evaluation of where staff needed to fit into the organization, because as I was saying earlier or this week to my team, we don't make decisions based on who our owner is. We make decisions based on patient need, based on acuity. We make decisions based on regulatory changes. We make decisions based on our referral sources. So those are the reasons that we have ebb and flow in our efficiencies with staffing and the programs that we provide. But there was angst, and I'll tell you that post-sale, our staff are very pleased with the fact that we have support with things like a staff mentoring program, with scholarships that are offered through the Altitude Services Company for our staff to continue their career path. Those are all things that speak well to taking care of those who are taking care of our most frail elders. So from that perspective, it's gone well. I think the other bit of it that Avi touched on was the support that we receive from an HR perspective, from a nurse consultant perspective. Those are all areas that we can lean back on them when we're unsure of a big CMS change comes through. Just making sure that we're bouncing it off and we're making sure that we're current and compliant with the regulations that we need to be current and compliant with. So, and I'm just here to kind of give the real life version of what happens before and after a sale. So, you're happy to ask me anything you want.
Okay, Ms. Petrie, go ahead and ask all the questions you want.
All right. Welcome to our community. It's me. Welcome to our community, and thank you for being willing to answer some questions. How many years would you estimate it took for things to settle down after the transfer to the new ownership format?
You know, that's an interesting question because in the community, you know, there was our community is about 250,000 people, but we're a really big, small town. And at the time when we
No, you were
when
good.
we when the sale went through, the name changed from Lancaster Manor, which was the county name, to Lancaster Rehabilitation Center. And so it's kind of like in a small town when you buy the Smith House. You know, no matter how long you live there, you always live in the Smith House. People would always say, Lancaster Rehabilitation Center, is that Lancaster Manor? Sure, it is. And so the branding, actually, the rebranding of the name took longer and it had more effort in it than anything else. I would say that when I arrived on scene 4 years after the sale, it was business as usual.
For me, I look at it, first of all, and Amy and I were talking about this briefly on the way over, you know, you have to recall that all the staff that wanted to stay, stayed. Now, if we at some point over our, you know, in our new operations, if we evaluated that there was a person who did not fit the culture, or that we were overstaffed somewhere for some reason and we ended up being overstaffed in non-nursing positions, then that's a different story. But I would probably say that we, and forgive me, and Amy will nod when I say it, and we still do have 50-something employees 8 years on who are still from the pre-county days, but there were people who would insist on the county way, and it took some time to get buy-in from people. And the truth is, it really didn't come from pressure from me. It came from their peers buying in. And, you know, kind of the more, if I'm just looking at the room, the more people that bought in to the system, then those were the people who were doing the work and telling and again, there's nothing wrong with the county mentality, but the county, that way of doing business, that, no, this is how we can do it, or, you know, that we have certain things that we lost, but we don't have to go to a county board committee meeting for requisition to go buy a new TV. Mm-hmm. I just called my boss. My boss said, go ahead, go buy a flat screen TV, and a day or two later, it was sitting in the living room in the building or what have you. So,
and I don't want to oversimplify this because, you know, there was a lot. I mean, not a lot. There was commotion that went along with the sale, but at the end of the day, the people that work in skilled nursing facilities are there because they want to take care of elders, and so they still wanted to take care of elders. They had a different owner, mm-hmm. and there was some getting used to, but the day-to-day environment within the facility, we were taking care of elders, and that's what we continue to do. So, you know, the ownership piece of it, when you showed up the next day, the day after the sale, they were still taking care of the same residents, and they were still, they were still side by side, their same peers. So,
And they were still, the same people.
yeah, so it wasn't chaos in the building, if that was your
No,
question, or, okay.
no, but it
Let me
always
say
takes a
this.
bit of
I've-
shakedown to go on.
I've done 6 transitions, none to the county, but from one operator to extended care, and a former company that I worked at. And it generally takes about a year for a really full transition, for everything from policies and procedures to the general workings of the environment of the facility. And we just took over a facility May 1st, 2017, and it's now May 9th, 2018, so it's been a year. And to get all the pieces working together takes about a year.
Okay.
And it's a lot of different pieces that go into it. Some of the pieces, as the two peers of mine up here are talking, staff-wise, some of them take shorter times. People want to know that they're going to have a job, and once you settle that issue, and in 99.9% of the facilities that we've transitioned, every employee that was there is every employee that's going to be there the day one when we take over. And what they were getting paid is what they were getting paid when we took over. Their tenure dates could start over, but it's not something we did. So once those things are settled for the employees, they generally move forward with the transition of the operations is going to change a little bit, but our goal has always been that residents and family members would not see a major difference unless we were taking over a building that had huge quality of care issues. Generally speaking, wouldn't know that someone new took over from the day before. That's just not how we operate.
Okay. May I ask 2 more? All right. My next question is, our nursing home has a union. Do you have experience with nursing homes that have unions? And the one that Ms. Fisher is talking about, does it have a union, and can you speak to that?
You want to speak?
Yeah. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees was the union at Lancaster Manor. Because the facility was no longer a county-owned and run facility, the union disbanded. I never asked anything.
Excuse me, that was of their doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Nothing that I did. I'm not sure what the charter says about AFSCME having to deal with a private facility. That being said, I'll just speak, so we don't have any facilities that are currently under union, but our extended care partners certainly do. We've bought facilities that have, and we've inherited them, and we deal with the unions on a regular basis.
We have 8 facilities that have 3 different unions.
Oh,
So SEIU.
Within one venue.
No.
No,
Usually
8
facilities are
different
represented by
facilities.
one,
I got it.
Yeah.
Oh.
one or
And
another.
Most of them are with SEIU,
Okay.
Service International, healthcare employees. I have another one which is part of a Teamsters union. Not quite sure how they got there, but they're there. And then we have another one, food service workers also. Not just food service workers in the union of that facility, but they have been included in that union. So we have 3 different unions, 8 different facilities.
Okay. And one last question, because I know my colleagues have questions, and this is on the lighter side. How many of your facilities have in-house pets?
Well,
Full-time, as in pets that reside in the facility?
Yes.
So we don't on the altitude side. I'm pretty sure that you don't.
Well, it depends on how you define
Correct.
pets, because
I
there-
mean something
birds?
with 4 legs, not
Oh,
an
well, 'cause
aquarium
there
or
are
birds.
people that have birds.
I know
and we
that.
consider them pets. We do have, Extended Care has 3 assisted living facilities that do allow dogs. We do have pet policies, and just recently had, I think when the tour was going on, at one of our facilities, we had a short-term rehab individual was coming in for rehab and would not come unless his dog accompanied him. And there are some public health requirements around that, and we worked through that process, and he did come, and he's living with his dog, and he's paying privately for a dog walker while he's in therapy, but it's workable.
So resident rights should be at the forefront and the center of what we do. So for every resident who wants to have their pet, there are people who are, and I happen to have a friend of my wife's who's catastrophically afraid of dogs, would literally run to the other side of the street to the point that she actually left her young child once upon a time across the street. So while we have, I know that you have dogs that we have Humane Society, or people bring in dogs, or the administrator brings in, I know Matt brings in his dog at Homestead, so there's definitely animal interaction. There are people who don't want to have that animal interaction, so we have to balance those competing needs. We're all for it if we can make the accommodation and people want it.
All right, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Ms. Petrie, if you have more questions, now's the time to do it.
No, my
Okay.
colleagues have questions.
Mr. Mitchell.
I've just got a number of questions, if I could pose them. First, after the closing of the transaction and transition to the new owner, can you tell me about your dental services?
Sure. Well, I can speak to that. At our facility, I can speak to that. Dental services are required by CMS regulation. Every resident, by a federal regulation, has to have a dentist listed and has to have dental services offered to them on an annual basis and as needed. So dental services is covered first by regulation. And then what we have done operationally to make it easier for our residents, because a pretty good number of our residents don't have a big family support network. So we have contracted with an organization that has dental services that comes on site and provides dental care. And then we also contract with a local dentist who will, and affordable dentures, who will help us in that regard. So dental services is not an option, it's a requirement.
Okay. Next is, how do you treat therapy services?
On our campus, and I can't speak for all of the extended care or altitude facilities, but on our campus, we contract with our therapy company. It works out well. We work well together. I would tell you that if you were a family member or a resident, you probably couldn't tell if they were one of our employees or not, because they participate in all of our same employee relation events. We treat them like their family, but they are contracted.
Okay. Next is barber and beauty shop services.
We contract with a beautician as well who does beauty and barber,
Okay.
and then they rent space from us.
Okay. Next, if we're looking down the road, say, 3, 5, 10 years, can you tell me about the fixtures in your homes? Beds and mattresses don't last forever.
Sure.
Don't ask Amy because.
Because I spend a lot of money.
Well, no. Are you asking about? You're asking about. You're asking about beds and mattresses?
Yeah, your fixtures. Yeah.
No, because fixtures to you
fixtures
and
would
to me, who knows? Could that be different? Look, we started to talk about it. Beds. I mean, they don't last very long. So, just to give you a sense of, I started 12, 13 years ago. So we saw plenty of crank beds. Hand cranks, and it's fun if you go into a building, you get a sense if there's still a crank bed. It's really interesting. It's becoming less and less frequent. We actually have a program. I think, are we all electric beds now?
75%.
So, and we had none. So we've turned over in the last 8 years. We're not buying 250 at a time, but we've bought groups of 20, groups of 30. Certainly, when we renovated spaces, we did that. And mattresses, the same thing. We have low air loss mattresses. You can speak to the specialty mattresses we own or we lease as needed for our patients.
Yeah, it depends if the resident is a long-term stay patient and it makes more sense for us to buy the piece of equipment, then we'll buy it. If it makes more sense for us to rent it, we'll rent it. But everything needs to be upkept. So we, like for instance, on our campus, what wasn't renovated at the time of the sale, some of our long-term care neighborhoods weren't. So we take a group of, for instance, window treatments. We replace 10 per month. So that's not a huge outlay of cash, all in 1 month, but it's a constant refurb. You're just constantly having to do that. Carpet, tile, I mean, it's just cabinets. You're constantly having to do that.
And so you would have, for the infrastructure of the building, a budget? to
A capital
service-
budget,
Okay.
yes. And those are reviewed annually when we do our budgets.
Okay. Lastly, in your budget, what can you say that your unique marketing position would be, marketing, and what kind of marketing and promotion? Because currently, I mean, you're purchasing a 220-bed facility. Currently, the Champaign County Nursing Home has between 135 to 140 residents. Can you tell me what the unique marketing position your company brings to the table?
Well, I'll let Ron, I mean, you can talk a little bit about some of your markets, but you asked the wrong person, because she has honestly some of the most unique marketing that we've ever seen. So, but Ron, why don't you talk about
I want to
what
go
we're
back a
bringing?
little bit to some of the other questions, the dental program, because Illinois is different than other states are with dental. For the Medicaid population, the state of Illinois does allow you to use the patient's personal portion to buy dental insurance. And that's generally speaking what happens in most facilities in Illinois. They sign up with a dental program. A Senior Dent is one of the names of the companies that we do some work with, and there are other insurance companies that do that. So it provides the dental checkups as well as the work that needs to get done. It is a requirement. But nevertheless, the issue of having it be a requirement is how are we going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? And we work with these dental groups to sign up the residents for this dental program. The marketing aspect, as Avi started with in the beginning, it's really hard to sit here and tell you, all of you, what we're going to do in this facility. The closest I've been to it is when I came through the parking lot just a few minutes ago. So it is difficult. We have facilities that have specialty programs, in-house dialysis programs, certain care level things that we do, that we market. We're really in the markets of the communities that we serve. So really stressing the area. Nursing home is very much like real estate, location, location, location. Someone's not going to place their loved one, or their loved one doesn't want to come to a facility that's 20 miles away from their loved ones. It just doesn't make for a conducive visiting population. So we work really closely with the hospitals and the physicians that are in the community, and we do that and also in an assessment of what they would like to see in this facility.
Could
And
you,
that's the partnership.
could you own that facility with, knowing that you had 220 beds and you have 140 filled?
We've taken over bigger we've taken over some reclamation projects. I'm actually curious. I want to ask you. You asked about marketing. Are you asking about marketing sales? Or are you asking about healthcare? Because really, while in the end they converge, you're really talking about two different things at the beginning. And
I guess what I'm looking at is dental therapy, barber services, updating of your, what I would call fixtures, mattresses, and the things that you would have in the room for health and safety. So you've got a budget for that, but beyond that, uniquely, how do you bring patients and residents to the table?
Census development
Yeah.
is what you want to
Yeah,
ask about.
that's-
So I'm going to let Amy talk about that, and it's kind of a two-prong. So first of all, there's the healthcare aspect. So I can say to the community, I mean, we've talked about this in rural Nebraska, we can go and have a ventilator program, and we'll get 3 patients because we've decided we want to have a ventilator, or we've decided we want to have this or that or the other. We're going to tell the community. Doesn't work that way. The community is going to tell us, and by the way, it's a little bit of a trial and error. We've had insurance companies tell us open up a bariatric program. We've talked about, and I'm sure you'll speak a little bit about the cardiac program at Homestead. One of our facilities, we're just starting because the largest amount of discharges have to do with with some sort of brain issue, so we're working on a brain program. So you're creating a program or a healthcare service to meet an unmet need or an inadequately met need. That's the healthcare side. That's really the market pushing me. In terms of how we're top of mind, this is actually the best person to talk to, because I would call it a gimmick, but it works. Every gimmick that she tries works. So why don't you talk about finger licking chicken and all the fun, all the interesting things that you're doing? And
Well, you have to draw people's attention, you know, to have them remember your facility. One of the first things that I did, one of the first things I did was I created an advisory committee because I felt like I needed to get input from, I had a representative from the Chamber of Commerce on it, and I had a representative from all of the hospital systems on it. I had a representative from our family council on it, just to solicit their feedback. Actually, what I was doing was I was creating them to be marketers for us, because word of mouth referrals is what speaks the most for you. There's a lot of dollars that can be spent in print and TV and radio kind of advertising,
which we spend.
But what really, and you do have to have a polished product to provide to discharge planners, people that come to tour your campus for the first time. You need to be polished in that respect, but it's a people business. So we started this advisory committee, first of all, so that they could be our goodwill ambassadors, but also to get their feedback. What are you hearing out in the community about us? What's an unmet need that you feel is in the community? And those were community liaisons. Then we went to the discharge planners and said, what's an unmet need? And so the census was not great when it was still county. And so one of the things we did was we partnered with our regional heart hospital, and we became their primary referral source for all of their post-cardiac care. The hospital, trained our staff. That staff is probably the most stable group. We started this in 2013. Every single one of those staff members is still there because they feel like they're confident in their skill set. And we're taking care of acutely ill patients now because that was a niche service that was unmet in our community that we said, we want to do it, and we want to do it right. You have to have the confidence of the referral sources as well, and you have to be responsive to them. We have processes in place so that we absolutely respond to all the referral sources within a half an hour. One of the other things we did to build our short stay rehab program was we started a thing called rehab reunions, and every quarter we invite everyone that discharges home back for a reunion. We have a speaker, we have a lunch, and the first time we did it, we had 5 people show up. Next week, for National Nursing Home Week, we'll have another rehab reunion. We've had 73 people RSVP to it. Those 73 people go back out into your community and speak about being at Lancaster Rehab and the care that they received while they were here, and they're telling everybody at Hy-Vee Coffee Club all about your facility. That's the marketing that makes a difference. But essentially, what we did to kick it off, to make sure we were heading in the right direction, and so that we were all a unified voice, we went through a strategic planning process with our team. We spoke openly about our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats. And then from that, we developed a marketing plan where we devote a certain amount of labor and dollars to internal marketing strategies with our team. We have 300 employees. We need all 300 of our employees being our marketers. And so how do they do that? We spend resources, labor, and dollars on what I would call community relations, and then we spend the majority amount of our resources with our primary referral sources, making sure that we stay in front of them. And when we mean stay in front of them, we're at the hospital systems every day.
Just to give you a sense, by the way, of how your patients, just as the last point, I marvel, and we talk about it, Amy and I talk about it every week because we have a list of referrals, and we have a marketing call every week, and 40% of the people, I always say, I want to get people to tour the building, and just, no. Why? Literally, we now have toured, yes, no, or the third entry, been here before. We have repeat customers. So, when we've done our marketing and we've done our legwork, we get repeat customers. They had a knee, now it's a hip. They had a shoulder, now it's another shoulder. So,
Well, it sounds like your marketing is multifaceted, but if I could just ask about your annual budget, is there a line item for
Yes,
marketing?
absolutely there is.
Okay, thank you,
I go over it every month.
thank you.
She doesn't mean that she reviews it, she means
Yeah,
she goes over
the
it.
budget, yeah.
She exceeds.
Ms.
Caught that,
Furtado.
too.
So I have 4 questions. I'm one of the folks that was on the tour. So I have 2 tour-related questions that I probably should have asked at the time, but just sort of have sat with me since I left. And then I have 2 non-tour-related questions based on some research I've done subsequently. The first tour-related question I have is, of the 3 facilities that we saw, in the front of each of them, there's some really lovely amenities, right? There's a sort of little internet cafes with large print books, which makes a lot of sense to me. Ice cream parlors, which frankly, giving the health demographic of the people there maybe makes less sense to me, and barbershops. And like I said, all of them were really lovely in a sort of Harry Potter world kind of way. And why I say that is because there was nobody in any of them, except for in so out of 9 things we saw at all different times of the day, there was only one actual resident in one of the internet cafes. And so my question is, are those, and all of the facilities were pristine, right? So are those facilities used more just on days we weren't there, or are they sort of cosmetic?
So the marketing answer is some of that stuff is actually done for marketing. But I can tell you that you also were not there in the afternoon. I mean, ice cream is 2 to 4. That's a great time for ice cream. Just specifically mentioning ice cream. I mean, I can tell you that, and I know that Ron will speak to where the spaces get utilized, and Amy can also speak because at least with Lancaster, I had a hand in designing those spaces, and she'll tell you it's an all-day buffet. So, Ron, why don't you start, and then we'll have
So,
Amy.
yeah, I do think that part of it was the timing of the tours was a little early. And to Avi's point, some of it is marketing. The real design of why we create the spaces we do, and I believe I talked about this on the tour, is that it's really important for us to make these spaces visitor-friendly, because what ends up happening, and I have had 2 grandmothers in 2 different facilities over my lifetime, and some people just didn't want to go visit. I have siblings, and I have one of 2 parents that just wouldn't go. Some of it was her own mortality, and she just didn't want to see where she would be. But the others were, it's depressing, it's dark, there's nothing to do, or there's no place to go. And if you remember, in all of our facilities, there are libraries, there's ice cream parlors, there's sitting rooms, there's internet cafe. So there are places that family members can go visit mom, take her into the library, take her into the visiting room, and enjoy a visit rather than sitting at the bedside conversing at their bed, and that's all they get to see. So it's a multi-purpose event that we've created here, that it's not just for the residents that are enjoying it, and for those that want to, that's great. For those that don't and only want to go to the library when their grandkids come and they want more space, that's great too. And some of it is, we're in an age where we're marketing to a younger population. So in the old days, you marketed to people in their 60s and 70s. Now the people that are coming are in their 70s and 80s, but the people making the decisions are younger, and they want to go. And I think I told the story during the tour. In the beginning, we had Wi-Fi in the building, and the business office was complaining that, you know, they couldn't download payroll, that it was taking so long. And nothing really changed in the building. It's not like it grew or anything. But we went back and started looking at the Wi-Fi that was in the building and realized that we had 10 or 12 residents that were downloading movies and music and watching streaming music and movies on their computers. And we had visitors coming in and signing in when they walked in the door on their phones. And that was sucking the data plans out of these Wi-Fi buildings. So Again, not something that all the residents are using, but we've separated out. We now have a Wi-Fi for visitors, and we have a Wi-Fi for the business of the facility.
Amy, maybe you can talk a little bit about the Husker Lounge. Sorry to bring that up, and the children's playroom and the movie theater and some other things.
I totally agree with Ron that it becomes a spot for social interaction with families. We actually have to close our bistro between noon and 1 so that our residents, our long-term care residents, will have a healthy lunch. But there is a line in front of our bistro at 8 o'clock every morning to get in there and get the day started. You can smell popcorn throughout the building by about 10. So we actually have to hold off some of our bistro activity because it's a rockin' atmosphere all day long. We have a children's area. We have a Husker Lounge where they can go and watch sports. We have a library where we have computers set up and they're in constant use. Some of that, though, also has to do with your patient and resident demographics. As we have grown our short stay rehab and we have a younger population of patients in there, they're expecting those amenities. So although, like Ron said, not everyone uses them, they're there for everybody that wants them. And if you start to see a shift in your mix of patients that you're caring for, you'll be glad that you have those kinds of amenities for your family members, residents, and patients to access.
My second question is specifically for Mr. Ruffner, and I do kind of wish I had asked you this at the last part. Throughout the tour, one of our colleagues that's not on the board went and talked to some of the residents that were eating lunch or I think it was probably lunch. And when she was in there talking to them, you were visibly agitated by that fact. Why?
I don't recall being visibly agitated.
You were. I was standing right next to you.
You're certainly entitled to that opinion. We were, if I was, I can tell you that one of the things that Van and I spoke about repeatedly was that A, we wanted to keep the tour together, and B, that a large group, which we in the end allowed anyway, a large group would upset any regular nursing home in terms of staffing and in terms of patients. I believe I answered every question that was given to me. I did not hesitate. So this idea that I was visibly agitated or upset, or I think that's a mischaracterization.
Okay, we will just differ on that. The next question I have that is related to what Patsy asked you about labor relations. Specifically, I know that the National Labor Relations Board was looking into some allegations that sort of ran the gambit at your Burbank Rear Care property, from intimidation to failure to bargain in good faith, to unilateral changes in working conditions, and I believe there were some strikes involved. I was trying to find online beforehand, and I apologize, I kind of came straight from work, if those issues had been resolved. I know that they were still sort of ongoing until this past March, so I just didn't know if they had been resolved and how they had been resolved.
Sure. We're not the licensee of that facility.
But do you have an ownership share in that facility?
The real estate.
Okay, so you don't.
Not the license.
Okay, but so you are the owner?
I don't control the license, the staffing, the vendors, the labor relations.
So there are two different corporations. One is the operator, which holds the license, and they're responsible for the day-to-day activities of the facility, the employees, anything as it relates to residents. And then there's like the landlord of the real estate of the property. And for that particular facility, it is just the landlord. So we couldn't come in, we wouldn't even be allowed to sit at the table with the National Labor Board because we're not party to it.
But I will say that they did show up to my office, and I did welcome one of the CNAs into my office, even though I was in the middle of a meeting. Sat with Sharon Lake. She addressed her concerns. She asked me, she raised her concerns. I forwarded them on to the operator, and I haven't heard anything since.
So did you know if, I mean, so you have the issue, has the issue been resolved, do you know?
I'm not aware one way or the other.
Okay. And the last question I have is concerning the Chautauqua Nursing Home in New York City, in New York State, which bears striking similarities to the sort of situation that we find ourselves in which it was a public nursing home that the same broker that was the broker for our nursing home was the broker for that nursing home. Throughout the sort of broker process, they thought that there was going to be multiple bids. At the very last minute, you were the only bid. And just sort of some background, what ended up happening is they decided not to sell to you. They went and sold to another bidder. During that process, the county, they call them a county legislature, voiced a lot of concern about sort of that process. And I'm just really struck because it is like step by step exactly the same process. And they ask you questions about your relationship with the broker. Is it just a coincidence?
Point of personal privilege, does this information have anything to do with what's going on here? We have no way of clarifying any of that information or getting anything except an
Okay, I'll be
opinion.
more blunt.
I mean,
All right.
we can't, as a board, do anything about this information, substantiate it. I mean, he can respond to it, but I don't know anything about New York.
Well,
I
Mr.
don't
McGuire,
think
anything
I-
we say is subject to question.
And I
Wait, so therefore, Mr. McGuire, anything we say is subject to question, anything that Mr. Mitchell says, Mr. Page says,
Well,
we are here to ask
we-
questions.
we could bring up anything we wanted to bring up.
I didn't actually get,
And in
It
June,
is related to, if it's related to the functions of Mr. Rothman, we have to let them ask. And so let's let her finish her question, which she has not done.
we have information about the deficiencies and surveys of the nursing homes throughout the state for local areas, the Champaign County Nursing Home, and all of their nursing homes. That is actual data from Illinois DPH that we know and has been presented to the review committee, and hopefully will be presented to the county board. And I think we should use that information rather than opinion, which I understand is some of the information we're going to be presented tonight from people that have an agenda to not accept this seller.
Ms. Furtado, you can please
Okay.
continue. I will not suppress the freedom of speech on this board. People ask questions. As long as those questions have to do with operations of nursing homes, either Champaign County Nursing Home or nursing homes that these people represent.
so this is just a real simple question. There was another publicly owned nursing home that went through a remarkably similar process that is easy to find out if you just Google the name of the company, right? I mean, this isn't like deep research here, right? This is not opinion, this is fact. There's newspaper articles, it's easy. And it's just, there was concerns then about the process, and given how similar this was, I echo those concerns, and I just want to know, I just would like you to speak to that.
So what exactly is the process question?
So the question was, can you describe your relationship with the broker?
Yes. They're the broker, I'm a buyer.
And that's the extent of your relationship with the broker?
Actually, one of the brokers has his brother-in-law who works in the firm, but neither of them are my family, so if you want to ask them about their family connections, you're more than welcome to call them. But I have a relationship with all of the brokers in the brokerage community for senior care and senior living. Senior living investment brokerage, I can speak to Ryan Saul. I can speak to Marcus and Milichap, or IPAs, they now call them, Josh and Mark and Charlie. I could speak to Blueprint and name you 20 guys who work there. I have no relationship with them other than professional. And we've gotten to know each other personally, but that's it.
Thank you.
I would like to also mention, you did mention Chautauqua. I'm sure you're also aware of that the vote was actually a majority vote, and that in the interim, after I was asked to not participate in the bidding anymore, there was a subsequent changeover of some key county board members, and the vote did pass. I think I was a vote short of supermajority, and I think it was 2 or 3 people that did leave the county board. So no votes became yes votes, and the next buyer was the beneficiary of that. So this idea that I didn't, well, I think just wanted to make sure that the facts are on the record.
Are you done, Ms. Furtado?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Esri?
Thank you. Currently at our home, the last numbers we have, I believe we have 44 Medicaid pending. You have states or homes, obviously, here in the state. I understand at least the majority of them are up around the greater Chicago area. Do you have any other homes that their Medicaid are processed outside of the Cook County? I believe it is.
A number of our
processing case.
A number of our facilities are processed in Decatur, but majority of them are in Cook County.
Okay, so for those that are processed in Decatur, do you do anything special or to potentially like get them through the process quicker? Or do you see delays?
Say a prayer every night. So let me.
We don't have, I don't think we have, in terms of percentage of residents, if you have 40, it's approximately 25, 28, right?
What do you?
44 on 140. I mean, do I have my math wrong?
We have 44 on about,
Sorry.
yeah, the 145 or
So
so.
it's 30%. 30%. I don't think we have anywhere near that number. That's the first thing.
Yeah, so there was a question in the RFP, and I think it bears repeating. Probably 70 to 80% of our facilities have Medicaid, 70% of the population are Medicaid coverage. So I know that's been a concern for the people around this table, that the facilities continue to access Medicaid benefits for the residents that are there and for any future residents. And I can't imagine in my wildest dreams that would ever change. We are a Medicaid recipient facility. On the pending piece, it vacillates depending on time. What we do special is what probably every other operator does in the state of Illinois. You call your case manager of the caseworkers at Public Aid, and you ask them, please, this is going on 200 days. Can you please just get this one done? Or can you get these 5 done, and I'll leave you alone for a month? And we look at the longest bad debt that we're carrying, and we target those particular cases. We also belong to the Illinois Healthcare Association, or Healthcare Association of Illinois, which is an association advocate of providers, mostly in the Chicago suburban area. There are a few downstate, and they do a tremendous amount of work on all facilities' behalf on advocating with the legislators on what needs to happen with the Medicaid population. You'll also may know that there is a lawsuit pending in the state of Illinois. Extended care is part of that lawsuit, and I think because of an alphabetical issue, we were the second facilities listed because we started with an E, and we're suing the state of Illinois for these issues. That there's a lot of federal laws managing that Medicaid process and the timelines of what the state has. Within 45 days, if someone's not approved for Medicaid after an application is submitted, they automatically become eligible and are given a temporary status. The state of Illinois stopped providing that temporary status a few years ago. And so there's a lot that goes into this process, but something that we deal with on a daily basis and something that we work with very well.
Okay, thank you. And then roughly how many pendings per nursing home, I mean, on average, would you say, in the state do you have?
In Illinois, there's probably 10 to 15 given.
Percent?
No, people.
So that percentage is probably
Depending on the
maybe 10.
facility side, but 10% probably.
Okay.
And we noticed that when we did the tour with the county folks, it came up in one of the discussions, the amount of pendings that were there at the county facility, and I think Avi and I almost fell off our chairs because it's a huge number, and it can cripple if you don't have the infrastructure of having some buildings that have less Medicaid and more Medicare, and the reimbursements are higher in that facility to help balance out. Banks are not giving loans anymore or lines of credit based on those receivables like they used to. Most especially in the state of Illinois, they're not doing it because they just don't know if the money's ever going to come. I think it will. I think it's just a matter of time. I think this lawsuit will go a long way. I am extremely hopeful, even though the extended care facilities are in the lawsuit, I'm extremely hopeful that when it does get to a judge, that the decision is not made just for the facilities that sued, but for Medicaid as a whole, and the judge telling the state of Illinois, rectify the situation.
Okay, thanks. And then I have one other question. The idea of bad debt was brought up. In general, in the long-term care business, am a partner in a small electrical firm. We've had some bad debt that we've had to just, we aren't, I mean, yeah, if it would ever come in, it'd be great, but it's not going to. I'm sure it's not.
Don't bet the house on it.
But yeah, exactly. Don't bet the house on it. After what length of time, I guess, would you say, do you consider debt to be bad and you write it off your books?
It's really a payor by payor basis. Just to go back in general, we actually have a bad debt allowance on all of our financial statements. So 1.5%, 2%. We've seen banks actually insist that, we just saw a term sheet from a bank which insisted that we actually have a higher threshold of bad debt. The answer is really we're doing a periodic and a constant review of receivables. In Illinois, in 180 days is actually, unfortunately, normal. But I would tell you that as you get beyond 180 days, if you have a Medicaid patient that's not pending, then you've got an issue. Medicare, I mean, our days sales outstanding for Medicare are probably 45 days. So if we are beyond 45 days, we need to know, and it's really, I mean, Amy can probably talk about it. It's a claim by claim situation, but Medicare days sales outstanding are probably 45 days. Insurance, not in Illinois, but real insurance, in other words, Medicare-like plans is probably 50, 60 days. Illinois Medicaid average paying is probably, where days sales outstanding is probably 150 days.
Well, that sounded a good say. But I will say, any of the auditing firms and accounting firms that do long-term care, it's something we look at every year. And Avi's correct that in the normal process, it's about 2% of your revenues that we end up booking as bad debt month to month. So it comes right off the bottom line. So at the end of the year, you're not looking for where is this money.
And if you don't book it, and they see, whatever, they see $1 million, in the 365-day plus, they're going to tell you that you have $1 million, and you don't have the bad debt write-off. This is a little bit into the accounting weeds, but you only have a $500,000 allowance. They're going to tell you that you have to beef up the allowance by at least another $500,000, let alone any other receivables in any other bucket. So congratulations, whatever your financials were, there's a $500,000 coming right off that number. And then let's keep going. We actually had this. We actually had to over accrue in the facility, and now we are correctly accrued. So it depends on, it's bucket by bucket. It's actually state by state even, and payer by payer.
Illinois has moved to a 4% bad debt ratio.
I would just say operationally in the weeds. I think that one of the things that helps control the Medicaid pending more than anything else is having that discussion prior to admission. We admit Medicaid pending residents from the hospital, but we know in advance. We get the hospital discharge planner involved in the process in starting the application with the patient while they're still in the hospital. It's also relationship building with the caseworkers, as Ron said, and with the family members, setting those expectations before they walk through our door. That's with bad debt. Again, we know I should say 95% of the time now, we've gotten sophisticated enough with it. We know when we're going to have bad debt. We know that we're going to admit this patient because they're a Nebraska Heart Hospital patient, and we know we're going to write off their copay days. We already know that, but we know it in advance. What you can't afford to do operationally is have the surprises. You have to have those relationships and those conversations before admission. So there may be occasions where you're going to have bad debt, or you're going to have a Medicaid pending resident who ends up not getting approved, but it shouldn't be a surprise.
Okay, thanks. And this just conversation here and your responses brought up one final question. This is it, I'm sure. You mentioned that in Nebraska you accept Medicaid pending. At our home, we don't accept Medicaid pending. When they come into the home, they have to have a payer source already truly identified. In your other Illinois homes, do you accept Medicaid pending?
Yes, we do. I mean, as we went through the process, I mean, a lot of it's the front end work. So we may go to the hospital and meet with the family. Maybe a resident who lives alone and we need the family involvement to help us get bank statements or to help us get copies of insurance policies and things like that. But I mean, it's not a free-for-all that anybody who comes through the door, we're going to admit them Medicaid pending, but with some due diligence, if they don't have a recipient number at the time, because your pendings then, it's an interesting thing, I didn't even think of that when you talked about the numbers. So your process there is not even an approval of an application, because you're saying they're already approved, they just haven't been entered into the system and assigned a recipient number yet. So that's actually a better story than what I thought it was when we talked about it at the tour.
Thank you.
Other county board members, questions? Mr. McGuire.
Okay, let's see if we can get through this. Thank you and welcome to the home of Fighting Illini. Get that started. Recruiting looks well, good. Hopefully, we can get through some of the things. It's hard to see everything or show them everything that we saw on the tour, and I thought the tours were good. There's been a lot of questions about Medicaid and Medicaid pending and finances. Max, I think, covered many of them. One of the things that people have kind of asked about is valuing our nursing home and how you came up with that. And some of it is what was in the RFP and what we asked. And I think as the buyer, are we getting enough money for this nursing home? And I think we got the buyer we asked for because of the many different stipulations, the 220 beds, the collective bargain agreement, all those things. Let me start with that question and the condition of nursing homes. Can you respond to that and what you see in the market and how you came up with that?
So if you're asking me about Illinois sales, again, that's finance. You could talk about price per bed or price to revenue multiples. I think actually you're probably getting a better price. $55,000 a bed south of, I'm sorry, if it's $50,000 a bed plus or minus south of I-80 for a facility that's half occupied, you're doing very well. So, I also think, Jim Hazard from JCH, it was another broker who I know, also, he once said to me, price or terms? Price or terms? What do you mean, Jim? So if you want to say, here's the building, do whatever you want with it, I'm going to run it as a nursing home, of course, it's the highest and best use, then fine. But, it's a sieve. You start to create conditions. Again, I've seen these conditions, some more, some less, some more restrictive, some less restrictive. The more restrictions you put on a building, usually that's going to thin the buyer pool. I can also tell you that knowing the buyer pool of Illinois operators, they're having their own issues. I mean, I don't want to name names, but I have a pretty broad and deep view all at the same time. And the idea that there's going to be, people want to put numbers on the assets. In the end, for buyers, for real buyers, it has to do with a function of the cash flow that the building can produce. People in the healthcare industry don't want to hear that, but that's a financial reality. If it makes $1 million, someone's going to value it at X, or let's agree that it's running well, it's going to be valued at X. Some might value it a little bit higher, some might value it a little bit lower, but the chances that you're going to get some out of left field valuation to the positive or to the negative, very unlikely.
Well, luckily you've come and want to do many of the things, or do in your other nursing homes, those things, you know, the beautician shop, the dental, the things that you've talked about.
You have
today.
to.
Yeah, to do this. You know, I guess one of the questions I asked you when we were there is how you do accomplish that. How do you know, there's a philosophical question about public entities and private entities, and you have to make a profit, so that obviously costs you more money, so you're going to cut staff. But when you look at this deficiency comparison chart, you actually do better than we have it here in some places in local nursing homes. I asked, how do you do that? And we discussed a lot of different issues, like the computer system that's there and how you capture $170 a day per person, where we struggled with 136 or $140 a day. Go through some of that again, if you could, to explain maybe to other people how you're doing everything you can. And the Medicaid pending thing is really a big issue, because it's like our census is about 138. It bounces around 138, and there are 44 Medicaid pending. So at 30 or 40%, we're not collecting $1 from those.
So I'll just speak in general terms, and I can certainly let Ron handle it. So I don't know the staff. I'm going to assume that the staff they're good people, and they probably have some knowledge. It's not, and I don't mean that they don't have any knowledge, or he said he don't have a lot of knowledge. They could be the most well-intentioned and learned people. I think what we bring, or what sophisticated operators bring, is just more. What does that mean? You guys have one administrator who has his or her administrative experience. I've never seen 5 surveyors walk in, or have the surveyors ever walked in on a Sunday, or what do you do in this complaint, or what's going on in terms of, we're seeing a lot of our friends are telling us that surveys, or we just got surveyed last month, and they're looking at infection control. So I think there is a broader view. I can make 5 phone calls and asking the same question to 5 people, have a view into 100 nursing homes. And I think that just goes, I was just talking about surveys, but I think that expertise and the resources, thank you, the assets, the human capital, and capital, human and otherwise, is available to us, is not necessarily available to a smaller entity with more limited resources. Like I said, I have I have dozens of administrators. And by the way, I have administrators who used to work for me or one day will work for me. Clinicians, right? People whose job it is to maximize reimbursement. Clinicians, people whose job it is to minimize survey deficiencies. Experts in accounting, how are you handling your cost report and maximizing reimbursement? How are you handling, payroll-based journaling for HR? How are you handling hiring, firing, training? I can go on and on and on, but it's an expertise, or it's a group of resources that a larger company has that a smaller company doesn't have. Compliance. You can continue.
So, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is resources, and it's the infrastructure of the operator. And you are what we call the one-man band, where you're operating on your own, and there aren't a lot of resources to be able to access information on how to do things differently. But you talked about a couple of things that I want to address. One is the amenities issue, looking at the infrastructure of the building, the libraries, the internet cafe, and one of the stories I think I told at the tour, I had met a state senator in Illinois a month or 2 before his next visit, met him down in Springfield, was advocating that we need to do something with the rates of reimbursements for nursing homes, obviously on the Medicaid side. and how troubling it was to get paid for what we're doing, get paid late for what we're doing, not get paid at all for what we're doing sometimes, and the bad debt pending issue. And so we had this whole spirited conversation. And then a month later, he came and visited one of the facilities in his district, and he was looking at the plans that we had drawn for the internet cafe and the new therapy gym and the libraries and things. And he said, well, wait a minute, weren't you the guy just last month that was telling me you were having difficulties because the state wasn't paying you? And I said, yes, I was. The problem is that if you don't do these things, your market is going to continue to shrink. The market is changing. Residents aren't going in 4-bedrooms anymore. They'll run out of a building if you were showing them and touring them a building and you had 4 beds in a room. I don't know what the composition is of your beds at the county home, but it is a problem. And so you have to have these things to be able to attract the market that's out there. It's kind of like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And that's what we're trying to attract. We're trying to attract a younger population that are there short-term rehab, go home, may come back a little bit later for the next, so on. But the infrastructure, the computerization that we talked about at the tour and that you referenced today, we have a case mix index, which is how we get paid from Medicaid in the state of Illinois. That is all computerized. It's something that we monitor on a daily basis before the department heads leave. It's our policy that before the department heads leave the facility for the day or the shift ends, they have to call up the point of care, it's called, report and see what CNAs or what nurses documented their care for that resident. And if there is no documentation for that resident, we go back to the CNA and say, before you leave, get on that computer and document your point of care, because all those pieces in the point of care goes into the MDS, which is the computer system that creates the assessment tool and then creates the case mix index for the state of Illinois. So if you have a facility that's not monitoring your case mix index on a regular basis, or if you have an antiquated system where you're doing it manually, it's very difficult to achieve better results on increasing reimbursements from Medicaid. Does that answer all of your questions?
I'll go on. And that does. And it talks a lot to the training of the staff, the facilities, the many facilities, the opportunity to move from facility to facilities. I was able to talk to other people, and the person that was there had been moved to another facility, a new facility. The diversity of the staff, which I thought was important. But it also goes to, you obviously don't receive, you don't have a levy for your buildings from the taxpayers. You don't have a levy for your operations. But yet you talked about the fixtures, building a budget for your fixtures and having those reserves. Reserves you discussed, and you can explain this. There was competition for assisted living in the area, and Avi, if you want to explain that, you had the reserves to be able to build onto one of your facilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one building. I mean, we've undertaken over time. First of all, routine CapEx, whatever you want to call it. Replacing beds, mattresses. That's kind of, I wouldn't say easy, but that you have to do. In terms of real projects, I mean, our office history is such that with or without a bank, we've done all kinds of projects. It's Dyer, Indiana, 2 hospitals got together to create a building, and we realized that if we did not put on a new component of our building, that we would be in trouble competition-wise. What you are referring to is we did take over a county building. We did add on no new patient rooms, but we added a 2,000, how big is it? 2,000 square foot therapy room. We added the children's playroom. We added an improved lobby, movie theater / multi-purpose room, an all-day cafe, private dining, and a custom admissions room, and the Husker Lounge. So the answer is, you have to do what you have to do to compete. It's sometimes you can, we actually had this at the beginning. We did compete because we did a better job. And people were still coming into the same building with the same dusty rose color cabinets and kind of the bluish green. Teal.
Seafoam green, yeah.
Thank you.
Seafoam.
Seafoam green. One of our dusty rose is my personal favorite, actually. But the point is, you can have that, and you can show better quality measures. You can show star ratings. You can whatever you want to say that you think you're doing a good job, and that's great. And there are people who will respond to that. But there's also people who are going to respond to aesthetics. And when you say, I just put 1 million or 2, or in some cases, I think Lamont was 6 or 7. And said, this is what the market wants. The market wants 30 private rooms for short-term rehab and allows us to have the other rooms not be bathrooms, we call it Jack and Jill, 2 rooms that are sharing a bathroom, but now we customize and built 2 bathrooms, one next to the other, so the left room has the southern bathroom, the right room has the northern bathroom. The point is, you have to do what you have to do to compete. Otherwise, you will get left behind. It's not when. It's not if, excuse me, it's when.
Right. Competing in the market for the care of the people that are there.
Yeah,
and you have to
as Avi
compete
was
for
saying,
staff.
it's an easy process if you have a good quality of care facility to talk about the quality of care. The problem is in the market, a lot of people are gravitating toward the chandelier in the lobby, or the new whistles and bells of no longer dusty rose, and now we're into maybe grays and whites and things like that. It's an aesthetic as a driving force. Televisions, I've been looking at this proposal for televisions that that have the internet connected to it, and loved ones can send messages to their loved ones via the television through the internet. And all I keep thinking about is, I can't get my mother to use the remote at the Comcast at home. I can't imagine, but in another 10 years, it's going to happen. And we will have those TVs in those facilities where they can stream right in their room, or they can get internet access on their television and get messages from their loved ones. Now, I think it might be a little soon, but the competition starts building, and if you're not there, as Avi's saying, you will be left behind. And clearly, we've learned that over the number of years. I've been in long-term care for 24 years, and the changes that I have seen are phenomenal. These projects that Avi's talking about, we added a wing to 3 different buildings, took about 5 years off my life. At the same time, but they're projects that had to get done to sustain these buildings and make them better appointed, and better for quality of care. People want to work there, people want to live there, people want to go there.
The last thing was the dining facilities were separated. Ours that's been an issue. It's not terrible. It's just dining food is important to people, and I think that's a positive thing. My mother was in a nursing home. There's a family of about 13. We were trooping through the room, as you said, to be in the room with her. There was another lady and her husband there. They had to move her because we couldn't take her out of the room, and she was screaming most of the time. We all felt very bad about that. My mom didn't really want to be there. So what you discussed about having family in there, it's really about space and care, and so
Thank you.
that it is about what we're doing here is about the care of the people that are there and making sure they do get good care, and the staff is taken care of.
In my 30 years, I've realized you have to have 2 things that you do really well: food and beautician. So, and our expectation is that we do provide menu-style food, and then we provide, obviously, options with the different venues through the bistro, through the private dining rooms.
And choices even on the regular menu. So, look, it's the last point I'll make is resident choice. First of all, it's interesting how it flows through and permeates a lot of the regulations, and just even without that, resident choice is just a market force that even without the state surveyors telling me something, that's coming, again, used to be you could tell somebody when their meal was, or you could do this or that. A short-term rehab patient will tell you what they want. And if you don't ask, they'll tell you anyway. And if they don't tell you when they're in your building, they're going to tell you because they didn't come to your building why they didn't come.
You done, Mr. McGuire?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman.
Mr. King?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I have about 3 or 4 questions. They're pretty quick, I think. Ms. Fish, you mentioned earlier a little bit about 300 employees is what you spoke of. Were you speaking specifically about your Nebraska center?
Just my facility.
Okay, that's just your facility. And if you would, you talked a little bit about evaluation of fit during the transition period. Could you describe a little bit about what that process looks like as you were working through your staff or working with staff?
I wasn't there for the actual union, the ownership transition. However, the evaluation of staff is constant.
Okay.
I'm sure in the state of Illinois, you're not much different than in the state of Nebraska. We're desperate for nurses. We're desperate for people that want to enter into elder care. We're desperate for CNAs. So it's our job to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that they have a solid skill set. And if they don't, I feel like that's on us. Then we need to do more to help develop that. There are some, you're going to make some hires that aren't good fits. Pure and simple. We also want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to grow our own. And so we offer CNA scholarships for folks in our housekeeping and laundry and dietary department.
And that's company-wide, by the way.
So we're constantly looking at ways to grow our team, not to diminish it. Now, I will also say, though, that on our campus, probably all the campuses the expectation is that you adjust your staffing levels to your current census. And so we have staffing grids that we adjust. But that's not a surprise to our team members. They're told that before they even accept our offer for employment, that our only way to pay you is to have people living here and receiving our care. So that's not a surprise. When we make adjustments, an hour here, take a longer break there, who wants to take a day off, when we have fluctuations in our census, we're making those staffing adjustments. It doesn't really have anything to do with who owns us.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Rothman, if you could speak to, when you consider the home here, you speak to what your vision for care would look like. And I'd like to mention, I guess, the group that went on the different tours. You saw a 1-star, I believe a 3-star, and a 5-star home. And yeah, I would assume you value all of those homes, but how do you, when you think of your vision overall, how does that work with a 1 to a 5-star?
So we own a facility in Arizona where the staff longevity is fantastic. We bought from a longtime owner several years ago, and that was a 5-star facility. Today is now, for full public disclosure, it's a 2-star building, and yet we just made the post-acute network for TMC, Tucson Medical Center, the #1 hospital, and we were the #1 facility in the grouping, in the grading. So I really try, and I think we had a chance, or the evaluation committee members had a chance to hear a little bit about how we feel about star ratings. They're a market necessary evil, if that's a phrase. We don't like them. Not because we're getting graded, but because we don't think, for better or for worse, that they're telling the story. Yes, we have a 5-star facility with 5-star quality measures. Is Amy really, is she 5? Are you, yes. Brag a little. Are you 5 times? No. Is it 5 times better than the 1-star facility? Is it 2 times better? What does that mean? So it's also a question of what type of patient base you're taking care of. In the end, If our facilities are not performing from a clinical and a financial perspective, we want to see that improved. That's the end of the story. If I had a one-star building, but I had patient satisfaction, my length of stay is lower than the state average, my readmission rates were down, and I was making money, I'd say, please continue to give me one-star ratings across the entire company. I would welcome them.
Okay, and part of my question, I guess, is if within the rating system, I guess we have done really well, I guess specifically with staffing, and we've kind of maintained a fairly decent rating with staffing. And so asking you to speak broadly about staffing, that's part of, I think, why I was kind of asking.
And the star ratings with staffing are obviously changing now that the PBJ reporting has gone live. And so you're going to see fluctuations in that a lot. We actually, as Avi mentioned, we are a 5-star building overall. We have 5-star quality measures. We're the only one of the 13 skilled facilities in our community that has 5 stars of quality measures. Those are the things that mean a lot to us. We're a 3-star rating in staff. The last time they posted it, we were a 4-star rating in staff. That's going to fluctuate. Again, it's going to fluctuate with your, well, it should fluctuate with your census. It's going to fluctuate with literally who's on vacation and who called in sick. So,
and we didn't judge any differently. I mean, no, we didn't judge Amy any differently in terms of her performance when it went from a 3 to a 4 or vice versa. Like I said, it's really a total picture.
Okay.
And I want to say one thing about the star rating, because I really loathe it. Whenever you start with a premise of how the end is going to look, it's a flawed system. 20% of all nursing homes will be a 1-star facility. 20% of all nursing homes will be a 5-star facility. That's in the design of the calculation. So when you start with that premise, you've kind of molded yourself what you're really not yourself, but CMS, what they're really looking for. So it's not a representatively fair assessment of what's really going on. The other piece to staffing is up until this PBJ came into effect where it's electronically calculated and submitted. Up until this time, which it just started this quarter, is the first quarter where that's actually going to be used to calculate the staffing requirements. The way in which they calculated the staffing stars was based on what the person who was filling out the form put on the form. So if you ended up, it's called a 671, it's done on admission to an annual survey. If you end up putting, which I have had one facility do, they put the LPN hours in the LVN line. Well, Illinois doesn't have LVNs. It's licensed vocational nurse versus a licensed practical nurse. So our star rating went down because it looked like we had no LPNs. We had all LVNs, and Illinois didn't recognize them. So that was a whole manual system that you were at the mercy of each operator doing it accurately, honestly, and appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Just two more questions, if you will. So I'd like for you all to maybe speak to how or what do you all see as maybe some of the practices you've used to particularly reach out to communities of color that might like to or be interested in utilizing the services of, extended care homes, so forth, and what specific marketing things maybe you've done?
From a staffing perspective or from a patient perspective?
Maybe a little bit of both, but I'm speaking patient in that regard, but you speak to staffing as well, maybe.
It's an interesting question and a unique question. I would argue where we end up addressing people of color is in religious groups. We've marketed to churches. We've gone to meetings where people are of one affiliation or another are involved, but that's probably the extent of it. Just like we don't, and I'm going to put it out there, we don't market to. We market to people that are in the hospital. I don't want to even say who we don't market to. We market to people that are in the hospital. And if they're all black or white or brown, then that's who we're marketing to. It's in terms of outreach to people of color, I can tell you that again, demographics depends on our staffing in certain places is very much, and in certain places is not. I think actually you can speak to where we are, and Amy can also speak to the unique, I think the new immigrants that we have in Lincoln, which you wouldn't normally think of.
And the new CMS mega rule specifically speaks to cultural competencies and cultural sensitivity. So we're doing even more now with our initial care planning, making sure that every aspect of our care addresses cultural differences, from food services, as Avi said, religious services, social programming. It's not just a nicety to do under the umbrella of person-centered care. It's soon going to be, in November of 19, a federal regulation to do. So from an admission standpoint, yes, we don't care what your nationality or culture is, but one of the other things that is afforded to us is the ability to have interpreter services. We contract with an interpreter service so that we can have dialogue, appropriate dialogue, if there's not family members available to do that. And that's something that our company supports us doing, obviously. So there's a lot of different aspects of being culturally sensitive with both staff and your patients and your residents that you have to be mindful of.
And I would say for extended care, our facilities are representative of the communities we serve. I think Avi alluded to, we have a facility in Lansing, Illinois. It's predominantly an African-American community, and most of the residents are African-American. Most of the staff are African-American. So they're really microcosms of the community at large.
Okay,
And most of our residents are Cornhuskers.
Cornhuskers.
I don't know, you waved her off, I don't know.
Cool. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Storr.
Thank you. Ms. Fish touched on it a bit earlier. Meals are probably one of the most important things that nursing home residents have to look forward to. Are meals served? How do you ensure that meals are served on time?
Well, simply put, if they're not and they're not at the right temperature, then you're going to have issues. I'll tell you, just going back for a minute, I think, and Amy will speak to her experience, food service is a highly contentious issue, and I don't want to say I've yet to see. It's really hard to get, and I don't mean, what I think is delicious, you might think is bland. I mean, I laugh because I'm thinking of my kids. My mother-in-law's husband is unhappy with the soup because it's too peppery, can't stand pepper, and I'm tasting it and it tastes great. So understand that you're dealing with 140 different palates, and so managing the specifics of what is good food service is very tricky. In terms of specifically or generally, food service is no longer your cafeteria when you were a kid. It's not tray service. It's restaurant style service. It's no longer here's the menu. It's here's the menu. Here are choices. What else can I get you if you don't like the choices or the alternatives? It's steam tables. It's a fine dining experience. So, Amy, you can speak to it.
Our campus was originally set up to have, and we have a very large kitchen on our ground level, and so everything was brought up in trays initially, and in the last 4 years, we have installed steam wells in all of our dining rooms, and we do point of service straight from those steam wells. The food is temped better, the food is appreciated more, and then you have instant access if you want more food or something different than what's on the menu. So we've really tried to bring food service closer to our residents and our patients.
Continuing along that line, some residents require hand feeding, and I've recently been visiting nursing homes, and I've really find that there's a lot of understaffing, especially on weekends. How do you folks compensate for or ensure that there's adequate staffing on weekends, and that the residents, who need extra help in feeding, obtain that?
Well, I can tell you that several years ago, we actually had a situation where I think here was our activity staff. The activity staff thought that lunch was lunch for them too, and we basically said, look, there's X number of people that need to get served, and the residents take priority and precedence. So it's all hands on deck. That's number one. Number two is in terms of staffing, you always have a staffing model. You might not see certain elements of a building that are, everyone gets days off, but the staffing ratios shouldn't change. If there are issues with staffing full-time, so 7 days a week, then you might be talking about shift differentials, you might be talking about bonuses, you might be talking, heaven forbid, it's a dirty word in a company, about agency. But this idea that we're going to have a weekend short staff, that's going to, if that happens and I see my overtime spike, Amy, and if Ron sees that, the administrators know they're going to get a call. So it's up to the facilities on an individual level, and it's up to the companies on an overall basis to make sure the facility is staffed mornings, afternoons, and evenings with the appropriate staff, whether it's Tuesday or whether it's Thursday, or we've talked about Thanksgiving, Christmas, you name it.
And how we do that is we evaluate acuity on all of our stations or all of our wings, however you want to, however you have your patient caseload divided. We currently have 5 different neighborhoods, 60 beds on each neighborhood. And so we're constantly looking at the acuity of those stations, not only from their care needs in the dining room, but how many need two staff to assist them, in the restroom. And so we're constantly attempting to balance. If we see a shift in acuity on one neighborhood, then we're going to shift staff to that neighborhood. So we're trying to also keep a balance internally within our own areas of care.
How do you know that is happening?
I mean, overall, it's a supervision.
That is to say, I mean, it's one thing to kind of sit in the office and say, yep, we've got so many people here, and it ought to be done, or
overall, it's a supervision issue. It's a management issue. At the extended care facilities, we have a manager on duty 7 days a week. So any manager that works Monday through Friday will take an on-call day and take a day off during the week, so that there's someone in the building that's walking the floors, looking at the dining rooms, checking to make sure that we have supplies, making sure that we have linen, making sure call lights are being answered, making sure the dining room services are appropriate. That's what the managers, and they're there, like I said, during Monday through Friday, generally not a problem for meals, but on the weekends, there's a manager on duty Saturday and Sunday.
I think system-wise, you end up with, if you have food service complaints or, call light complaints from a family or a resident, now, it might spike because that's when family members visit on the weekends. It's a natural thing, but at the same time, you might look at your information, your data, or an administrator should know and say, well, I looked and call lights aren't being answered. So they know, again, from a management perspective, if we're dropping off on Friday and Saturday and Sunday or what have you, we're going to know when and why, or we're going to want to know when, why, how are you fixing it? Because we actually encourage and embrace the idea that people, by all means, you have a problem, I don't want it covered, I want it uncovered, and then we can say, okay, Amy can say, we're not doing what we need to do, and we've had this conversation, we're not covering what we need to cover on Saturdays in the afternoons because of X or Y or Z. Well, how are we going to figure that out? And it is a management issue. It's a manager on duty. It's staff knowing that there's a culture that they can speak up and say there's a problem. It's an administrator. It's ownership that asks random questions at random times and shows up to buildings at 3 in the morning.
It often happens during dinner as well, because the day shifts are predominantly all the department heads are there. So we've also implemented the same manager on duty for the weekends. We've one day a week, one department head starts later and stays longer so that they're there to monitor the dinner service and make sure people are doing what they need to get done.
And the other way that you know if it's working or not are your outcomes. You know, what is your weight loss? You know, our residents experience weight loss. What are your audits telling you when you're doing dining room audits? Our table mates getting served at the same time? There's a lot of factors that go into defining customer satisfaction scores. A lot of things go into determining if you're meeting their needs.
Thank you. Let me, if I could, very early on, I'm sorry, the gentleman in the middle, I didn't quite catch your name.
Rothner.
Huh?
Avi Rothner.
Avi.
Yes.
Okay. You said something about changing, we were talking about years to settle down. I think it was Patsy Petrie that brought that up. And I have in my notes that you said that you try to retain all of the nursing staff and then evaluate whether you need non-nursing positions. And of course, and it's been my experience that the non-nursing positions are the ones that have the greatest patient care, resident care, and do the feeding, changing, toileting, and so forth.
I would include, I mean, that's a CNA, that's a certified nursing assistant. I would include that in my nursing staff. And if I can, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to clarify. My goal isn't to look for, my goal is to just be inquisitive. So what we've done historically is we usually actually start with anything but the nursing staff. So that's CNAs, LPNs, RNs. We had a famous argument, Amy could tell you about, that we reduced the dietary staff necessary to feed patients by, I forget what the number is. We've changed vendors. We'll look for places that we can take money and put it back into the building or out of waste that doesn't cost us anything, doesn't appear to be a change. I have to be honest, as I mentioned on the tour, does anyone know who the insurance company is? No. My buildings, no one knows who the insurance company is. We have insurance. So if we can get substantially similar coverage and save 10 or 20, or in one building I saved $500,000 basically from a pen. In fact, the sellers were calling my broker to ask their advice on insurance. It's just an example. Food service. Obviously, I need to have quality food service, but if we're buying, if the food budget per patient day, and that's how things are oftentimes looked at, is some number, and all of the buildings are at 30% less, we've never argued that it shouldn't necessarily be 30% higher. We've just said, can you please help us make a case for it? So I'm not looking actively to cut staff or not cut staff or grow staff. There have been plenty of instances and opportunities where we've actually increased staff. It's more to assess and reassess and assess again, what is the correct staff at any position and in any department for the given group of patients and volume of patients.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Storer. Other questions or comments from Mr. Patterson?
Hi. Do you know who will manage the nursing home if you already purchased it?
I'm sorry?
Who will manage the home? As far as like, do you guys use a firm?
No, I mean, basically day-to-day staff, day-to-day management is the day-to-day management that's on site. So we've never, we've been blessed when county administrators or deputy county officers who've been administrators, they go back to work for the county. I had an administrator who wanted to go work for the health department, but my goal is that the management, the day-to-day operations, the person who fed the resident dinner, and the person who did whatever else in terms of activities of daily living the day before are the same people. In terms of management, there's an extra layer that we're bringing in terms of, I don't want to say corporate, we like to call it a home office management.
So you basically manage your own facilities. You don't do that through outside firms, or?
Correct.
Okay. Let's see. How many homes do you guys own?
Depends on how you quantify own.
Okay. So for
A fair number. We don't count. Amy, do we count?
I don't know.
Ron, do we count?
Yes, I do.
Do I? Okay.
Extended
Do
care.
I count?
No, Avi doesn't. Extended care operates 18 facilities and 3 assisted skilled facilities, 3 assisted living facilities, 2 psychiatric facilities. Those are the facilities, and the reason that we don't count, and it's a legal issue of how many do we manage versus how many do we operate. The legal issue is the facility operates itself. I, as the CEO of Extended Care, consult to the facilities. Because what happened in the days of old was when facilities got sued, they would always add everybody to the lawsuit. So over the years, we've changed our culture. We call it a home office, we call it consulting, that we're not really driving the day-to-day operations. That's left with the administrator. We set policy. The administrator wants to implement the policy, they implement the policy. If they don't, they have to come talk to me and tell me why they don't want to implement it. And then I make a decision with the ownership of whether or not that administrator has to implement it, but it's their facility to operate.
Amy is very clear from a privilege and a responsibility perspective that she is the CEO of the building.
Yeah.
So it seems like you differentiate between facilities that you manage and facilities you own. So for facilities that you own, who manages those typically? Do you have like companies that you work with regularly, or how does that work?
There's really, the distinction you might be referring to, or that we might be hesitating on, is facilities that we own the real estate on. That could be the distinction. As Ron mentioned, there are frequently, in fact, in almost all cases, two entities: a real estate company and an operating company. So in our case, we have several instances where we own the real estate and we lease it out to a third party.
How often do you sell homes?
It happens, not often. It's not. We're probably longer term holders than most. We've had some buildings that we weren't successful in and sold after a couple of years, and we've had buildings that we've owned for 35 years. So we are not day trading stocks. We're not opportunistic business buyers. We don't have another. We don't have another. This is our core business, so we look at ourselves as long-term holders. Have we never sold a building? We've sold buildings.
When was Altitude founded?
2011.
So you said you've owned homes for 30 years. What was that in reference to? Under like what entity?
Under my father, who's been in the business for 43 years. Extended Care has been in some of the buildings he's owned, as I said, for 35 years.
Okay. So you had a facility in, I think it's Merrillville, Indiana. It was North Lake nursing home and rehab that was closed by the state of Indiana. Can you explain what happened in that situation?
Well, I was not there. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure I know the whole story. It happened many years ago and before I came to Extended Care. There were, I know, some quality of care issues in the facility. I also think that there was a physical plant, not a physical plant issue, meaning there was radon or anything, but there was a physical plant. It was an old structure of a building. It was actually 3 buildings that were kind of connected. And the northwest corridor of Indiana is very, very competitive with nursing home beds. And it is an overbedded area. Right now, you cannot get a license. Actually, there's a moratorium on the entire state of Indiana. So I think a number of issues came to the forefront, and the building was closed.
Have you had any other facilities that you've ran that have closed?
Sure, we've closed buildings because they were no longer economically viable.
Okay. And how long have you been with Extended Care?
4 years.
4 years, okay.
But he did work for a sister
I knew he
company
was gonna
for,
say that. So before I came to Extended Care as the CEO, I worked as the Vice President of Administrative Services for another nursing home company to which Mr. Rothner Sr. Is a partner of as well. So I've worked for the Rothner family for 25 years.
Okay. So we were discussing star ratings earlier. Mr. Rother, I believe you said something like you don't, as long as the finances improve, that's the end of the story, and you don't care if...
no. I also mentioned the care.
Yeah, so you had said earlier that you don't care if it's a 1-star as long as it's making money? I mean, is that...
And I talked about outcomes.
Okay.
Outcomes are of critical importance. Patient care is of critical importance.
I believe Avi did reference pre-hospitalizations, discharges too early to the hospital, quality of care, as well as the financial piece. There was a lot more on the front end of it than the back end, which was the financial piece. All things have to converge.
So, how do you think you would objectively measure the quality of care that you provide if you're not a big fan of the star ratings?
It's measured probably 800 times in one company, and it's 1,900 times a day, times as many interactions. I mean, it's all of the patients, all of the staff, all of the family, every interaction, every day, all the time.
What does that mean?
In addition, well, what Avi's getting at is if you're not running a good facility, you're going to hear about it. So the families are going to be complaining, the residents are going to be complaining, the staff will be complaining. And so all those interactions add to or detract from, depending on the operation, how well the facility is operating from a quality care perspective. You also have your partners in, and by partners I mean collaborative relationships with physicians. You need physicians to come to these facilities. If you're running a bad facility, you're going to have one physician or two physicians that also is not really all that great in quality of care, and so he's going to go where they'll let him go. If you have a good pool of physicians, they're going to want to come to your facility. Same thing with the referral sources. You're getting referrals from hospitals, discharge planners, social workers, not-for-profit social service agencies in the community. If you have a bad reputation, you're not providing good quality of care, they're not going to send their patients to you. So a lot of that goes into how a facility judges its quality of care, in addition to also not the pinnacle of the judgment is public health the public health surveys. Public health does come out on annual surveys and does come out on complaint investigations, and you could look at over a period of time how your public health surveys stack up. If I had a facility that got 5 violations, which is below the state average, and those 5 violations were on things that weren't quality of care related, that would be more significant to me than if they got 5 violations and they were all about incontinence care or tube feeding or infection control or med errors and things like that, medication errors. So you have the ability from outside sources, which encompass everyone, doctors, hospitals, social workers, residents, family members. You have public health surveys on how you do there. We also do in the extended care facilities, and I think
you mentioned Pinnacle.
Yeah, I knew we were
Yeah.
going to key on that.
Right.
So we also do Pinnacle. It's an external company that calls our residents' family members and ask, how are things going? They have a set group of questions. It's totally blind for us. We don't know when they're calling them. We get their names on their report if we need to follow up on them. but that's a customer satisfaction survey. We do it on discharge residents, we do it on current residents, we assess the family members, we assess the residents.
I will tell you
That's
that,
our feedback.
speaking of those Pinnacle surveys, and they are monthly, when we do get a survey that causes alarm, actually, there are intra-month, sometimes we get we did a survey, this is sent to us right away. Amy can expect a phone call. If it's Amy, what happened? And sometimes there's a story, but there's always a phone call. I think you can speak to in terms of quality.
Sure, and the other thing that Pinnacle does is they do all of the Core Q questions that will soon also be a part of the Nursing Home Compare website, so you'll be able to compare all of those 4 Core Q questions as well.
So we, obviously, we've had financial troubles at the nursing home. I mean, that's why you guys are here today, essentially. We have the unique situation where we get, I think it's about $1.2 million a year in our property tax subsidy. Is that right? How are you guys going to make up that difference? I know a lot of people have had concerns about layoffs or staffing cuts, and I did notice that 7 of your guys' facilities have 1-star ratings for staffing. The nursing home, the Champaign County Nursing Home currently has 4. What can you do to reassure people that staffing cuts aren't going to come, and is that usually something that you go after to make a home financially viable?
Well, I think we've covered the star ratings and how we feel about the ratings in general and what those
Can you
ratings
speak
indicate in
specifically
staff.
to staffing, why it is that, what is the cause of getting a 1-star in staffing if it isn't related to appropriate staffing?
I mean, it could be related to filling out a wrong box from an LPN to an LVN. I don't think it necessarily, I can tell you that for us, and as Ron mentioned, 20% of the facilities have to be 1-star. I don't think in any of the tours that have been done or in any facility that you walk in that you're going to say, well, there's no staff here, and that's why it's a 1-star building. But in terms of layoffs, I can tell you that my goal is not to lay people off. I mean, I don't want to say it can demoralize a staff, but it can demoralize a staff. My goal is to grow. I would rather grow. And if I have qualified people and I mean, we talked about this at Lancaster and other facilities. We've stayed overstaffed because we think, for instance, maybe this facility is staffed for 160 patients. Okay. So now administrator, new administrator, old administrator, whoever you are, I want to grow into that. So not today, not tomorrow. I'll live with 160 staff per 140 patients, but what's the plan to get there and how are you going to get there? You don't have to cut staff. We have to grow into it. I can't speak to every single fear. I can just tell you that my track record is my track record.
It's not a goal.
So you said there could be a number of reasons why, like not filling out a box properly or stuff like that. Can you speak to specifically why any of your facilities right now are having a 1-star rating for staffing?
I'm sure I can't.
So is that just not a concern for you guys?
No, I just can't speak to it. Staffing is always a concern.
But can you speak to why specifically you guys are given 1 stars?
No.
There are a number of reasons. One of them, as I indicated earlier, is the way in which people fill out the staffing form during your annual survey. Another could be that there are competitors in the area that are not recording appropriate hours on their 671s, which is the form you fill out during your annual survey. And if you happen to have 500 hours of nurses and you put a 1 in front of that 500 in that box, then all of a sudden you're 1,500 instead of 500. Could be another reason. The other, probably for our facilities and why some of them have 1-star facilities, is that there's a heavier weight on RNs versus LPNs and versus CNAs. And RNs are at a premium right now, just geographically across the country as well as geographically in Illinois. And I will say that's something that everyone needs to recognize, is that long-term care is not reimbursed at an RN level. LPNs are the workhorse of the nursing staff in Illinois facilities. If you are a predominantly Medicaid facility, you cannot afford to operate with more RNs than you can with LPNs. That's just a fact. It's just something you guys are grappling with now as well because you're trying to sell the facility, and we grapple with on a daily basis. We've decided and made a conscious decision that we're going to have to staff more LPNs, which are lower education level, but still nurses, and that are paid lower than RNs are. Most RNs that come to a nursing home want to leave within the first year. They get a first year experience, and they want to go to the hospital. It's just a fact of life. It's something we have to deal with on a daily basis. The economics in Illinois are just not there for the RN population.
And have you guys visited the facility here?
No.
Do you typically visit facilities before you purchase them?
We would expect that we would be able to do that during due diligence. Every process is different.
Okay. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Other questions from county board members? Mr. Goss.
Thank you all for taking this grilling. It's with a smile on your face. We can laugh a little bit. I think the biggest issue is here, I come from an entrepreneurial background, work for an entrepreneurial family, and it's hard for folks to grasp that entrepreneurs actually manage and make decisions at a exponentially faster rate than public nursing homes. I mean, we argue about stuff here, and we argue about it for 3 months, where you argue about it for about 10 minutes. And you make decisions, and you deal with that, with what happens, and you give accountability to your staff. That's very obvious from that. Can you talk a little bit about, I was intrigued when we visited that your resources. So you have an administrator and a director of nursing and your staff here, but what do you provide for resources? So you went in a good explanation, and I found it very valuable.
Sure. So I would go back to the decision-making process. We ruminate on whatever issue it is, we make a decision, and then we see what happens, and then we still argue about it afterwards. No, I mean, in a good way. That was the right decision. I mean, people ask me, what's your job? I said, it's making decisions, and I cannot, just my percentage, I'm wrong all the time and I'm right all the time, just by the nature of the number of decisions that I make. Hire this nurse. It worked out better than I ever could have expected. Oh my God, what a disaster it was. Hire this administrator. What a great fit. Or look what happened to my state service. So we're not afraid to make decisions, and I think that's why we sit in these chairs. Now, resources. So we have your typical building administrator, maybe an assistant administrator, director of nurses, assistant director of nurses, let's call it area managers, dietary, fine, housekeeping, laundry. In addition, there is an accounting staff. There is a AR staff that is watching and managing the front door, or helping your facility manage their admissions from the time they walk in. I'm sorry. Can I ask you to? Thank you. So there's an AR staff making sure that from the time they walk in, that we're going to be able to bill, that we're going to be able to get paid. There is an AP staff making sure that our bills that we're receiving, we owe the Bob and Don's Plumbing or Cisco or US Foods. Is it correct? There is an accounting staff. There is a reimbursement staff that is helping us maximize our reimbursement. There is an operating staff that's helping us operate. There's compliance that's helping us comply with any new rules, regulations, or anything coming down. There's HR staff, hiring, firing, benefits. There is general nursing and clinical. So that's everything that's happening in your building from a clinical perspective. It's not just driving reimbursement, but are we providing effective prevention of infection control? Are we advocating and providing resident rights? Are we turning residents? Are we, whatever the clinical avenue that we're talking about, are we doing that correctly? We actually had a conversation about, I think you were there for it. what's our policy on restraints and bed rails? So what's our clinical policy? And that clinician is evaluating. I mean, how many times have we talked about we don't want bed rails, and the resident's family wants it, and how do we handle it? So that's a clinical call. Operational calls. Ron, did I miss any aspect of our?
No, but I will say it's not just a clinical consulting where the director of nursing, and as we talked about comparatively, a facility that's standing alone has very few resources. Our director of nursing has a clinical vice president that she can call or he can call and say, I've got this patient and this is what the doctor is saying and I'm not quite sure I know how to handle this, or can you come and help train my staff on that? But in addition to all that consulting side, we also go in and we do our own mock surveys. So whenever my staff are in a building, they are looking at it from a regulatory perspective. They're looking at housekeeping. They're looking at how the residents look. Are the residents happy? They're looking at activities. They're looking at food services. They're looking at housekeeping. Everything about the operations of the facility are mirrored in our consulting resources.
I can't believe one of the resources that Avi didn't mention was our purchasing. We have a gentleman that works out of the altitude office that helps us with major purchases. He also helps us negotiate contracts with all of the major vendors, for instance, food. They also negotiate for all of the buildings, like our work comp coverage. So there's some efficiencies and savings when you have an umbrella organization using the number of beds or the number of employees in totality versus just for your own individual facility.
Okay, any other questions for county board members? Ms. Petrie.
As long as everybody is asked, because I'm a
Ms.
second
Petrie,
round.
you've got the microphone, use it.
Okay, fine. Some of what I am hearing from you leads me to ask the question if you've implemented in any of your homes, or maybe across the board, the Eden concept, so that the home is run for the residents rather than for the schedule of the staff.
No, we have not implemented the Eden model. However, I will say that our facilities are moving and have moved over the last 2 to 3 years on the person-centered approach, which is very much so in line with the Eden process. As Amy had said, this process of person-centered approach is becoming a regulatory issue. That each year public health and CMS adds pieces to it, and each year it's going to become a bigger and bigger piece of how we manage. It's challenging. From an operations standpoint, it's incredibly challenging. You know, we have facilities that have 150 people, and the Eden's model and person-centered approaches that they should be able to, and it's really nice, but they should be able to get up and have breakfast whenever they want. Well, in a facility where you're trying to cook breakfast and then get to lunch, it's really hard to have 20 people coming in at 11 o'clock saying, no, I want my breakfast now. We've tried adapting models to, they could come in at 11 o'clock. We're not going to say, no, you can't have breakfast, but we're going to say, yeah, you're not going to get the breakfast that's on the menu that everybody else got in the dining room. You can have cold cereal, you can have, hard-boiled eggs, things that we have ready and can get out, yogurts and things like that, readily available at 11 o'clock. That's the way we're moving toward the Eden's approach and the person-centered approach, because a lot of it is around dietary, a lot of it's around activities.
And sleep.
You know, when I got into the business 24 years ago, it was in very different positions, but I would tour the facilities and I would say, you know, like, I cannot believe the activity department is doing bingo. Like, can't we think of more creative things to do with these seniors? And it was my goal to get bingo off the activity calendar. And hell have fury the moment I tried that the residents didn't revolt and say, what are you doing? That's our favorite activity. Bingo went back on the calendar.
Okay, following, next question. You own a number of facilities, and so looking at the average percentage that you can see that allows you to pay for the costs of your facilities, is it 40%, 50%?
Percentage of, I'm sorry, percentage of what?
Of the payer mix that is Medicaid.
Oh, our Medicaid percentage is well over 50 company-wide. It's probably, what is it, 70 by you?
It's at least 70%.
Okay. All right, and then if I'm listening carefully, I got the impression that the use of agency staff is,
A dirty word?
yes, okay, I got it. You don't have to.
We do it, but because it's, I mean, we talk about staffing, I'm not going to say, no, agency is a dirty word, let's not have staff tomorrow. That's a recipe for disaster. It's more, we want to understand how did we get here. So we have OnShift, which is a software that alerts our staff, do you want to pick up an extra shift? We'll provide bonuses. It's more the culture of, it's not that we are against adequate staffing, which an agency in a critical situation would provide. It's more the idea that we want to have staff continuity. So I don't look at agency as a preventative. It's not a financial preventative measure. It's a care and clinical issue.
I understand. So then you are more willing to pay time and a half to your own staff,
Sure.
or go into 12-hour.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
we've had agency. I mean, you've had agency. When it's necessary, we've had it. And then we've said, okay, what's the plan to, we have it. Given the fact, it's like a geometry problem, given the fact that we have agency on the weekends or every Tuesday or holidays or whatever the pattern is, what are you going to do? Not today, not tomorrow, but as a plan, what are you going to do to get rid of it? That's all.
Okay. You'd like to minimize it is the bottom line.
I can't stand it because those people cost more than time and a half, number one. And number two is they don't, I don't want to say they don't care, but they don't know.
They're not as
They don't know the
They're not as
residents.
invested. Yeah, but
Yes,
they don't.
right. I understand perfectly. Okay. Are any of your facilities supportive living facilities so Medicaid can be used to no?
No.
Oh, okay.
And the licensing requirements are completely different.
Okay.
And
I understand
there's a
that.
freeze in Illinois on it.
Yeah, okay, I got it. Back to the food. Food is very important for everybody. I periodically go over and eat at the nursing home, so I am sensitive to that aspect. So 2 parts of the food. Do you grow your own food at any of the facilities, and do you cook from scratch at any of your facilities?
Yes and yes. We've actually had these discussions because in terms of residents and emotions, scent is very powerful. I was actually just reading about a facility that basically had scratch and sniff walls, seriously, in a memory care unit. But in our facilities, we want people, we know we can, of course, we can get loaves of bread for sandwiches if they're making sandwiches, but we want breads to be made. We don't want, Eggo waffles. We want people to make waffles with a waffle maker. We want pancakes. In terms of growing vegetables, it all depends on the real estate.
Right.
We don't always
I
have.
understand that, but the principle of it,
Yeah.
and it
also a very
also
therapeutic
engages some of your
activity.
residents
Yeah.
too, depending on the kind of beds.
Yeah, as
Raised beds.
no, but as Amy discussed, it's actually also therapeutic. It's sometimes when you're growing vegetables, it's not just the facility, it's or the staff. It's with residents and families, and that becomes a point of activity or point of pride of the actual people who are living there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Final chance for county board members. All right, we have 2 members from the RFP review committee who are members of the from the community. Do either of you have questions or comments? Claudia?
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here. I had a list of like a lot of questions, but a lot of county board members have asked them, so I just have two questions. Well, we've been talking about food a lot, but I also heard you, Amy, mention Cisco, and I was wondering if y'all know who the vendor or who your vendor is for your Illinois facilities, your food vendor.
Performance.
Oh, Performance Foods.
Performance.
P-Champ.
Yes. P-Champ.
That's how we always remember it.
Okay.
P-Champ.
Okay, thank you. And then I was curious about when the county board issued the RFP through Marcus and Millichap, we were told that to expect 5 to 6 bids, and we ended up with only the one, which was from y'all, and your bid was at exactly $11 million, not 1 cent over. And I was curious, did you have a sense or somehow know that y'all would be the only bidder, or did you not want to compete based on the dollar amount? I know we set the minimum price at 11 million, but I was surprised that the one bid we got came in exactly at 11 million. I was just curious about that.
Bidding is a little bit art and a little bit science. I think county facilities, first of all, let's review what the buyer had to do. Normally it's, I have $11 million, and someone says, yes, please, and they sell the building. I had to answer RFP questions. I had to fill out certain forms. I have to show people around on what we call a dog and pony show. I have to come in front of the board. And I'm telling you honestly, because I've been through these processes, and then there are the potential that board members use the way they're going to vote no matter what to embarrass a potential buyer or what have you. So this idea that it's such a simple process, it's not that way. I can tell you that the facility's been in the paper. Some people want to avoid that. I can tell you the facility's losing plenty of money. That is usually something that reduces the buyer pool. So there are lots of reasons why the buyer pool could have been reduced, or specific circumstances for Illinois buyers. People who don't operate in Illinois, typically, we don't see a lot of new operators in the state of Illinois. I can name you the ones who do operate, and then they want to stick to their geography. So I can't tell you what happened. In terms of bidding at the minimum, I've seen the process sometimes where when you do have everyone meet the minimum requirements, that you simply you ask people for more information, or you ask them to bid again. So I would turn it back to you and suggest that perhaps one person bidding at the minimum indicates, or it could be a reflection of the current value of the facility in its current state.
Mr. Nudo, do you wish to say anything?
The question of four-star staffing. I was on county board back in 11 and 12, and I was also on the county nursing home advisory board, which a number of you supported me on that that ordinance that we put together. But we were running at about 195 to 205 residents at the time. And is it feasible that four-star staffing can also mean that maybe you're overstaffed when you're running at 135 and 136, and there is a direct correlation? I'm in Jim Goss's school of being an entrepreneur, that if you don't take the necessary steps to cut it, then you do run a $1 million deficit every year.
I'm going to let my administrator answer that, because this was something that I promise you, not scripted. She brought up on her own on the car ride down. So Amy, I mean, you can talk about it.
Sure, because obviously you can do some homework on this campus as well. And when I saw 4-star staffing with a 2-star overall, that was my first comment, was for the current census, it may be overstaffed.
Let me be clear. We've seen 1-star staffing with with wonderful results. We've seen 5-star staffing with less than optimal results and everything in between. I don't like any one metric is a very dangerous thing. Somebody asked me about pricing methodology. Oh, price per bed. I've seen facilities that can't find a buyer at $18,000 a bed, and I've seen people clamoring at $125,000 a bed. So I always find that one metric, if you just want to use a star rating, it's dangerous, very dangerous.
Again, acuity always has to be a part of that as well.
Right. The last question I have is, again, to the 1-star, 4-star staffing. When we did the metric of measuring the number of tags or deficiencies that the surveyors found in the 16 nursing homes, they were at less than half of our 4-star staffing group. And as far as stronger tags, the categories 3 and 4, we were 4 times higher in percentage than your 16
For
units.
scope and severity.
Yeah, scope and severity. So I agree with you about the star ratings if you don't dig into things like the deficiency tags and what you're trying to achieve here. I feel a sense of urgency with this company. They make decisions fast. My experience on county board, no offense, guys, is we take a little time. So, and it does get in the way of running an efficient entrepreneurial business.
I want to step in just one moment, and it gives me an opportunity to free cheerleading. What I mean is, the numbers right now might be bad, but I don't think necessarily, as we found at our facilities, every time we've taken over a building, 80% of the people that you think are going to be good are good. 10% sometimes you think they're going to be terrible, and they're going to, we like to say, fire themselves, and they end up being your greatest employees. And then there are other people, it's the exact opposite. I don't know the staff, and I don't want to say anything bad about them. I think it could be a oversight and a leadership issue. I do know there was no question that from our perspective, there would be an increased accountability. The facts, figures, stats that you talk about, we have no problem, and I've said this before, I have no problem if I'm inheriting whatever. All I want to know is, what are our goals to make it better? So Amy could tell me we're going to lose we're going to have a great time, we're going to lose $100,000 this month. Okay, and how are we going to get to break even, and when is that going to happen, and why is that going to happen? And lo and behold, we don't always get there. We get there faster, we get there slower. It's a rockier road, it's smoother than we could ever imagine, but I don't want to be too quick and say, the staff. It's the staff, it's the training, it's the oversight, it's the total picture. So you could have good people who are just doing bad things. And I really want to believe that you have good people in your building, people who want to be embraced and taught, okay, fine, I have no problem. We have 27 tags. Okay, I want to get down to 20 and then 18 and then 12. And I want to have no G tags, and I want to have no scope and severity in nursing. I mean, we'll take documentation tags all day long, but we'll spend 5 times as much time on a nursing tag. So it's a way for me to say, on the one hand, yes, on the other hand, not so much.
The other thing I would add is it's about efficiency. I mean, you can have 100 people and you maybe only need 50, but the other 50 aren't very efficient. Those are things we have to look at. Clearly, the building's not operating well, or we wouldn't be here. So you have to ask yourself, is this a road you want to continue going down yourselves, or is it a road you want to say, we've done and if somebody asked if we sold any facilities. Believe me, it's a huge ego knock when it comes to the point where I say, we just can't make this building work anymore. We just need somebody different to look at this and manage it and operate it to be successful. I just can't do it. With all the resources I have, it's a huge ego thing for me to admit that and to get to that point, but it's a point that sometimes you have to get to. It's not operating well. We have to look at these structures and systems and efficiencies, and they'll be evaluated as we go forward.
Last chance for questions from county board members. Mr. McGuire.
Sorry. Well, I wasn't going to say anything else, but you're betting $11 million on it. And you're right about the staff. It is a good staff. It's a nice building. So I think you have all the opportunity in the world to get it back to 220 or whatever it is. And that's what we want. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Esri.
One final quick question. I guess you were talking the idea of coming in right at 11 million is your bid and only having the one. I guess one thing, and tell me if you'd agree with this or not. In this case, I would say we found our maximum price for this market with these conditions on it. I would say we kind of found our maximum price because we only got the one bid from the one bidder, and it met our minimum, which ultimately is our maximum.
So I've seen these processes go a number of ways. I've seen quite literally sealed bid auctions, right? If you meet the RFP requirements and you give us a post-dated check and it's just what's the number. I've seen open outcry auctions. I've been part of those. And I've seen bidding processes, and I've seen people tell you that we're going to wait, and again, I am not part of the political process here. Like I said, the virtual for sale sign was put up and I came. But I've seen we'll wait, how we feel, equal, less, more than the price. I've seen places where, we're going to say that we care about, the commitment to quality, but somehow the highest number wins. And I've seen places where I've seen everything. So I do know that Marcus and Millichap is an experienced broker. They've probably brokered the most county nursing homes in the country. And I think they probably run a good process. I think, again, south of I-80, people aren't coming into Illinois. The reimbursement isn't great. We get paid, right? It's still winter. It's not spring because we're getting paid for January and February. So this idea that there's going to be, and the facility's losing money, and it's been in the newspaper. So this idea that there's going to be bidders, lots of bidders. I don't want to, tell you that they were incorrect, but I've seen processes that have surprised them in both ways. They got more than they expected. They got less. Better bidders, worse bidders, more bidders, less bidders. That's what makes a market.
Okay, I want to thank the three of you for coming down here and spending some time with us and obviously answering our questions. We appreciate it. We're going to take a 3-minute break here because unlike all the other county board members, I cannot leave. So we're going to take a 3-minute break, and we'll come back to the next item on the agenda.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get the show back on the road. A little head count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We have a quorum. Next up is we're going to talk about the impact of the nursing home sale on potential nursing home sales and outstanding nursing home bonds. Ms. Tammy Ogden will talk about this. This shouldn't take too long, right? This will not, for those who want to participate, public participation, this will not take that long.
We wanted to present this information to the county board to ensure that you were aware of the actions that will be required in the event that the nursing home sells to a non-governmental entity, and what will be required in order to preserve the tax-exempt status of the outstanding nursing home bonds. So you can see from the table, the first two bonds that are In the table are refundings of the original 2003 bonds. They are general obligation bonds that are paid for with property taxes and they were used for the construction of the home. You can see the 2005A bond is not callable and matures on the 1st of January in 2019. The 2011 bond is callable on July 1st of 2021 and matures on January 1st of 2022. And the 2015 bond, which was a refunding of the 2006A bond, was issued for the purpose of mold remediation. It is an alternate revenue bond, and it is paid for with a portion of the 1-cent sales tax. That bond is callable on December 15th of this year, and it matures in December of 2025. One of the federal income tax regulations for the bonds is that no more than a certain percentage of property financed with tax-exempt bonds can benefit a private user, and this is measured on an issue-by-issue basis. So there's a two-prong analysis that measures private business use and private payments. If private business use tests are not satisfied, in other words, there has not been excessive private business use or private business payments, then a remedial action is not required by the federal income tax regulations in order to preserve the tax-exempt status of the bonds. If the private business use tests are satisfied or there have been excessive private business use or payments, then a remedial action is required to preserve the tax-exempt status of the bonds. So we'll go through each of the bond issues, starting with the 2005A issue. And the state's attorney's office and county administration have been working with Chapman & Cutler, our bond counsel, to review this issue. We did have them complete the private business use calculations for the 2005A bonds, and they did determine that those bonds do not satisfy the private business use tests. The reason that they did not satisfy those tests is because there's so little time between when a potential sale of the home might occur and when the bonds mature. So because the tests were not satisfied, a remedial action is not required. And what that means is that the final debt service payment, which is due January 1st of 2019, will be made with the property taxes that have already been levied and are being collected right now. So the 2011 general obligation bonds, in consultation with bond counsel, are very likely to satisfy the private business use tests because of the significant amount of time between a potential sale date and the bond maturity, therefore requiring the county to undertake remedial action in order to preserve the tax-exempt status of those bonds. So the remedial action that would be taken would be called the defeasance of non-qualified bonds. And basically, sale proceeds would be used to set up a defeasance escrow in the amount that is sufficient to pay the principal and interest and call premium on the bonds until the earliest maturity date. And so the minimum estimated amount is $4.6 million of sale proceeds that would have to go to establish the defeasance escrow. What would also happen in conjunction with the defeasance of non-qualified bonds is that the property taxes would be abated. So that amounts to approximately $1.53 million in each year, beginning in fiscal year 2019 to 2021. Also, like the 2011 bonds, the 2015 alternate revenue bonds are very likely to satisfy the private business use tests. Again, because of the significant amount of time between a potential sale date and the bond maturity. Therefore, the county will have to undertake remedial action, and it would be the same method that I mentioned for the 2011 bonds. Sale proceeds would be required to establish a defeasance escrow in an amount sufficient enough to pay the principal and interest and call premium on the bonds. And the minimum amount that's estimated, I'm sorry, I forgot the dollar sign here, is $2.1 million for the 2015 bonds. And these are alternate revenue bonds. So the debt service payments are made from the general fund. And so with the defeasance of these bonds, this would relieve the general fund of the debt service amount in 2018 of approximately $260,000, and in 2019 through 2025 in each fiscal year, approximately $280,000. Sure.
On the 2015 bonds, if I'm listening attentively, you said that would be property tax, but in your matrix, you're showing that as the alternative revenue.
In the 2015 bonds,
Yes,
did I say property tax?
yes,
Then I misspoke.
okay.
I'm sorry.
So it will continue to be the 1 cent sales tax.
The general fund would be relieved of having to pledge the 1 cent sales tax. So actually, these are alternate revenue bonds that have the backing of a property tax. So if we defaulted and weren't able to pay for these debt service issues with the 1 cent sales tax, then property tax would apply.
That might be what you were referring to when you made the statement. Thank you.
Sure. So,
Sorry, I have a quick question. So just to make sure that I'm following along with the numbers, and maybe I'm skipping ahead. So you have that 6.7 million of the sale proceeds would be required for the bond defeasance. Is that the amount minus the amount from the general fund debt service relief? Is that how you're arriving at that number?
are you referring to the memo?
Yeah, so you have it 6.7 million of sale proceeds would be required for the defeasance and redemption. But if I add those numbers up, it's over 7 million. So is the difference, right, because it would be the last two that we'd have to do defeasance. So the difference, is that because of the debt service relief?
So 6.7 million is the 4.6 million plus the 2.1 million.
Okay, so some of this, I see what you're saying. So, all right, I understand what you're saying. So some of it we'd be paying before.
The 2005A bonds, we have already levied for those property taxes.
Gotcha.
And
Okay,
that
gotcha,
1.2 million would go towards paying that debt service.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I understood the math. And this might be outside of this conversation, but how would we be able to pay off the rest of the outstanding debt once from the $11 million, right? Once we address this defeasance that we have to pay?
So there are other expenses that would have to come from the $11 million, the broker fee. There's an escrow holdback amount, and then the priority, of course, would be for outstanding accounts payable for outside vendors. The county, of course, would be last in regards to any outstanding accounts payable that was owed.
Do you anticipate our general fund would be made whole off of the $11 million, or do you think there will be a shortfall?
I believe there will probably be a shortfall, but we don't exactly know those numbers because we do not exactly know what amounts will be required to go into the defeasance escrows.
Thank you.
So since Mr. Weibel told me to be quick, I will summarize quickly.
I didn't say that.
So basically, what the county board would be required to do would be to approve ordinances authorizing the defeasance of these bonds and the redemption of the bonds at the earliest call date. And as I have mentioned, we think that the minimum number that would be required would be about $6.7 million. In conjunction with that, they would also approve an ordinances to abate the taxes that are levied in the bond ordinances. And the reason that we're making sure that you're aware of this is because the IRS guidelines require that within 90 days of a sale or closing date that these actions be completed. And then after the defeasance is set up, that the IRS is notified within 90 days of that.
Mr. Esri.
Quick question, it'd be the federal IRS that would do the final determination, correct? As to the defeasance, whether it's needed or not, because you're saying more than likely in this.
We are confident that the two issues that I mentioned would satisfy the private business use test when we've been in consultation with bond counsel. The IRS will not ever actually come in and complete any calculations, but if they were to inquire of the county, then we would have to be able to provide information to them in conjunction with our bond counsel.
Other questions? Ms. Furtado.
This is more of a comment. I want to thank you. You took a fairly complicated set of information and you made it digestible. And I know that you have been working very, very hard to answer all of our questions and prepare information for a lot of different scenarios. And I just want to recognize the work that the staff that you all have been putting into it. You really have gone above and beyond.
Thank you, and I also want to make sure that the state's attorney's office is recognized because they as well have been
Thank you.
essential.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Next up, we have public participation. I want to thank those of you who stayed around. Belden Fields, you're up first.
I have two concerns after hearing the presentation tonight. One of the concerns, and probably my major concern, is how we can assure ourselves if we sell the nursing home to these proposed buyers that the quality of care will be at least equal to the quality that residents have now, or better, preferably better. There's been a lot of denigration of the STAR system here. And I can sympathize with that. As a retired professor, I was required to give grades. And I hated it. It was the worst part of my job. Because I knew that there was a good bit of subjectivity in the grades. At the same time, I knew I had to give grades because graduate schools were going to expect that. Law schools were going to expect that. And that was going to be at least a partial rationale for their accepting applicants. I could just dish them and say, they didn't mean anything. I think they meant something, but I think they were fallible as well. So I'm not willing to accept the proposition that there's no meaning at all in the STAR system. And as I said before this body on a previous occasion, it did bother me that when the Vermilion County sold its nursing home to a private vendor, that it went from a 2-star to a 1-star home. So then the question is, if we don't get a full enough picture from the Medicare STAR ratings, are there other criteria that would permit us to make some judgment or some prediction, as fallible as it might be, on whether the residents will be getting as good or better care? As these people were talking, one thing came to my mind. If they uniformly, in all the homes that they run, ask for surveys from the relatives or the patients themselves on how they evaluate the care. Apparently now they're just using that for their own internal consumption. If they would be willing to share these surveys, it might be hard to compare with what people are getting now, but you could get some idea as to the level of satisfaction of the people who are using the nursing home. as a resource. I'm not comfortable with taking the position, doesn't matter because they're the only bidder. I don't think that would be fair to the present residents of the nursing home. A second concern I have, and I didn't realize that until tonight, is that this corporation or company, I don't know if they're an LLC or whatever they are, is a real estate business and a nursing home business. So when questions were posed about this nursing home, they said, well, we don't run that. You know, we just own the property. We don't run that. And I don't know whether the people that run it are franchisees or whether they're totally independent. I don't know. But the related concern that I would have is if they made a decision that they wanted to maybe keep the property but sell the nursing home business to another party, then that party presumably would not be bound by all the stipulations that you've placed on the present nursing home. So I would urge caution. I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go through people's minds and getting more information about the level of care that they are really giving in the homes that they themselves run. I think we owe it to the people who now reside in our nursing home. Thank you.
Next is Michael Wilmore.
Thank you. I know this is a difficult decision. I know there's a lot to consider. It's a very complicated issue. Like Belden, I do want to express concern about the dismissal of the star ratings, something that wasn't brought up. You know, there is a lot out there about the Rothners and the Rothner family. Several of them, including William Rothner, ended up on a list of the 10 worst nursing home operators in Illinois. That's a great concern. Knowing that staff up in the VeraCare facility that Mr. Rothner denies responsibility for believe that he is very much responsible for the troubles they're having. Knowing that as they sat here, a nursing home in Indiana that they operated was called one of the worst in the country by the government entity that shut it down is very concerning. The way that Mr. Rothner described whether or not they owned the place, well, it depends on how you define it. It seems to me that it's clearly set up to avoid responsibility. And I'm concerned that a decision to wash your hands of the nursing home will be a decision that's made in a similar fashion. It's a decision to avoid responsibility. AFSCME staff continue to come into the nursing home. They're trying very hard. These have been trying times. When there is a constant dialogue about how the nursing home is destined to be sold, it makes it incredibly difficult for them to do their work. When residents are uncertain of their future, when families are making decisions based on that notion, well, is it going to be open, is it not? That is what has really decreased the census. You know, there are things that can be done to get from here to a better place. AFSCME is very willing to stand up and do that. The constant turnover in management that we've had there over the last year has made it very difficult for folks to do their jobs. Stability, commitment, those are things that can get this nursing home to a better place. When you look at the number of Medicare beds, Medicaid beds, you know, clearly this is an unusual circumstance here. Clearly it can be better. Clearly more money can be coming in. Those are things that can get us to a better place. there are solutions. So I urge you all to consider those very carefully. You know that AFSCME represents hundreds of county employees, quite a few over at the nursing home as well. We will do all we can to represent all employees. You know, that's incredibly important to us. There are a lot of employees that are very afraid right now, and the future is going to be difficult. But, you know, again, we believe there are solutions. There is a way forward. Please don't make the easy choice and just wash your hands of this responsibility.
Okay, is Richard Kortenmeyer here? I don't think he is. Janine Burlacher? Okay. David Laker. David here? You left too. Dottie Vera Weiss. You're the last one.
I think we all get a prize for still being here tonight. I'm curious how many of you read the guest commentary in the News Gazette written by Kathy Emanuel about the nursing home on Sunday, May 6th. Some of you are nodding yes, some others are kind of not saying anything. But I think that it's really important as you look at the decision that needs to be made, and I know that the financial issues are really serious right now and that has to play a part in it. But one of the things that she mentioned is that because of the improvements in the care that they're providing, they've been able to increase the reimbursement that they're getting from Medicaid by about $200,000. It'll come to $200,000 for the year. And they have made really important changes. They've decreased the number of people with bed sores from 42 to 5. They've improved the physical therapy program, the restorative care program, so that people are going to be in much better shape when they leave. They've set up a new program to deal with pulmonary issues, and that has a major impact on some of the diagnoses that result in rehospitalization, and the rehospitalization rate has gone way down. And that's something that's crucially important to the hospitals that are sending people to the nursing home. And so those are the kinds of things that can result in a higher census as well as the increased reimbursement rate. And the higher census is the real kicker here in terms of how the nursing home is going to do. Mr. Rothner and the other gentleman and Amy mentioned...
Ron Nunciato.
Thank you. And Ron mentioned that it takes about a year for things to settle down. SAK has only been there about 10 months, and they've made some major changes. If the home would be sold now, it's going to be an extra year on top of that for all that transition that staff are going to need to be going through. And so I just want to remind you of the changes, of the things aren't as bad as, in some ways, as they were a year ago or less, 10 months ago. The nursing home already had the dental care program, which is incredibly important to health because of how it impacts nutrition. They've made changes in the food service already. Again, important for family and resident satisfaction. And so I think that putting all this in perspective as the context in which you need to make the decision, I hope that you'll consider that and see that there may be some changes in how you ought to be looking at it. And I think the issue, if you do not sell the nursing home now, which I hope is what will happen, then I think that just having the board join with the enthusiasm for having the continuity and saying, look at all these good things that are happening, that will help to raise the number of people that are in the nursing home, and that will help to solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak at public participation? Mr. Brown, are you interested? Apparently not. All right, we'll close that. And that's it. We're adjourned.